What if Dean deal with vampires during missions? Guys, please hit the like button if you like any part of the fiction. It motivates me for doing more and more. Subscribe and be a part of our group of Twilight Spark. So let's move in. 2 months and 2 weeks, for 2 whole months now, Dean had been missing. He could be dead, he could be alive, or he could be God knows where. After a month of research, torturing and drinking, Sam had come up with only one explanation: purgatory. He was pretty sure that that's where Dean was holed up. But right now Sam was driving half drunk on his way to see Amelia. He needed to see her, he needed to seek some comfort in her soothing voice and her soft, gentle touch. In the previous miserable months, Amelia and Riot had been the only constant in Sam's life. Every time that Sam would consider drinking himself to death, he would stagger back to Amelia, and she would embrace him without a word. She never asked about why he had left again without telling her in the middle of the night. She would accept him in without asking why he was back or what he had been doing. Amelia understood that Sam needed her, and she would comfort him until Sam left again. Kissing her goodbye, Sam would set out to find Dean filled with new vigor and strength. However, he always failed and ended up despairing over his failure and loss. So many times of doing this to Amelia, and she still accepted him. That was all about to change, because for the first time, after everything, after 2 fucking months, he had finally found something tangible. Even if purgatory seemed like a long shot, that was the only explanation that Sam could come up with, that Dean and Cass had been sucked into purgatory along with Dick. The Impala came to a halt in front of Amelia's house, and Sam's heart leapt in his chest when he saw Amelia sitting on the front steps of the porch. She had a shawl wrapped around her and was clutching a mug in one hand and patting Riot with her other. She stood up when she heard the roar of the Impala's engine, and she gave Sam a once-over gaze filled with worry. Sam realized with a jolt that he was still drenched in blood of the Crossroads demon he had been torturing. He mentally smacked himself for not changing, but she was already by his side, taking his hand and guiding him into the house. Riot jumping happily and thumping his tail enthusiastically on the ground. "So did you find anything on Dean?" Amelia asked him once he had cleaned up. They were sitting in the kitchen drinking coffee, and Riot was sitting with his head in Sam's lap. He nodded. When they had first met, Amelia had told Sam about Dawn, and Sam had told her that Dean was missing, and he was the only person who could find him. Amelia didn't question Sam on his bloody appearance, and she knew that the blood was his, but still, she continued to love him, and this made Sam realize how special she was. "I did find out something about where he could be, but I don't know how to get there or how to get him out. He could be in real trouble, Amelia. He's in a bad place." Sam gulped. He knew that any supernatural thing that died ultimately went to purgatory, so basically it was the last place for any hunter to be in. Dean was in there facing a motherload of vampires, ghouls, wendigos, leviathans, and Sam had already wasted 2 fucking months. "Don't worry, you'll find him, and I know you won't rest until you do," Amelia said softly while she stroked his long fingers. "Amelia, thank you so much for always being there for me. You don't know how much you've helped me. You kept me from breaking apart," Sam said as he idly curled her wavy hair around his finger. "You saved me too, Sam." She beamed at him and rose up as she placed a kiss on his cheek. "I'm going to bed," she announced, and climbed up the stairs with Riot at her heels. Sam wanted to follow her, but he had more important matters to deal with. He finished his coffee and stood up to leave. 3.5 months later. Sam threw the bloody machete in the trunk as he climbed into the Impala, all the while cursing under his breath. He had infiltrated a small vamp nest near West Virginia, wanting to get a lead on the whereabouts of the alpha vamp, but he got the same answer that he had a few days ago when he had tortured another vampire. All said the same thing. "The alpha vamp is dead." Sam refused to believe it. How could a creature that had been alive for so long, that had been called the Father, the Ancient One, Child of Eve, suddenly be dead? Sam was sure that it couldn't die, and the words of the vamp came floating in his mind from his last encounter in Montana. "When your kind sat huddled around the fire, I was the thing in the dark." But after getting the same answers again and again, he was beginning to think otherwise. He had been to both the mansions where the alpha vamp had previously started his nest, Montana and North Dakota, only to find both the places in ruins and a huge number of vampires within its walls. No order, no sense of hierarchy, and no alpha vamp. Sam had barely made it out alive. Now he was getting frustrated. He was grasping at straws here. He slammed his palms on the steering wheel, and the thought of his brother being alone facing all kinds of gore in purgatory brought tears to his eyes. It had been too long. 6 months had gone by in a blur, and he still had no clue how to get Dean out. He blinked away the tears. No, he still had one lead left, even if it was a long shot. He arrived a week later at a bar. From the outside it seemed like any other ordinary bar with flickering neon signs and retching men huddled at the outside street, but Sam knew better. Sam made his way into the bar, oblivious to the thick acrid smell that matted the air. He hurriedly made his way to the back. The bar curved into a large room. Despite being dimly lit, Sam could see slumped bodies on the couches, vampires leaning into and draining drunk girls. Sam quickly pulled out his gun, having darts laced with dead man's blood, and began shooting at the vampires, even though they were too dazed to notice. Finally he reached a small glass room and saw a vampire dressed in a black suit approaching him. His fangs were bared, and the white shirt under the black suit was crimson with blood. He had blonde hair that seemed to shine in the dark. Sam had no trouble tackling the vampire, and in an instant he had the machete to the vamp's neck, in case the vamp got any ideas and wanted to attack Sam. I need to talk to the alpha vamp, Sam hissed at the vampire. The vamp laughed. Haven't you heard? The alpha vamp is dead. The so-called alpha vamp was the father of a few, and he had deluded himself with powers that were beyond his comprehension. The vamp said this in a thick British accent. He was alarmingly relaxed within Sam's threatening grip, and Sam felt unease sink into his stomach. Something what right about this. Sam Winchester, you have been quite a menace, and lately you have been on a vampire killing spree. The vampire smiled nastily. Our master does not approve. The vampire spoke and shook his head in a TSK manner. Sam frowned in confusion. You mean the alpha vamp? You said that he was dead. The vampire chuckled. True that he was an alpha, but who do you think made him the alpha? But nevertheless he was not a true alpha. Do you want to meet the original one? The elder vampire himself. Sam frowned. What the hell was going on? They had been sure that the alpha vamp was the first vampire and the progenitor of all vampires, yet here he was hearing of another vamp, even stronger than the alpha vampire. Sam gulped. Yes, I would like to meet him, Sam said, but he did not relax the machete that was still poised at the vamp's throat. The vamp raised his hand and clutched Sam's wrist in an instant, and the machete fell to the floor with a loud clang. Sam yelled in pain, and suddenly something hit at the back of his head, and all he could see was darkness. Sam woke up with a jerk. The first thing he realized was that his hands were tied behind him. He slowly opened his eyes and saw a huge dome-shaped ceiling, and there were columns at the edge of the dome, and Sam was currently tied to one of the pillars. It was a carpeted circular room with hallways leading away in 3 directions. In the center there was a cherry wooden desk and a big wooden chair. No, it looked more like a throne, however the huge desk blocked the view. There were velvet couches surrounding the desk. Sam fidgeted against the ropes, but whoever tied him had done a very good job, and Sam was tired. He had barely slept for 4 days and had been continuously on the road. The only sleep he had gotten was from being knocked unconscious. He scrunched his eyes in exhaustion. Samuel Winchester. Sam raised his head at once, trying to find the source of that voice, and he noticed a man sitting on the chair behind the desk, his elbows on the desk and his hands clasped. He was sure the man had not been there before and he hadn't not hear him come. So you're the new alpha vamp? Sam asked, trying to keep his voice calm and composed, as the vamp continued to stare at him with narrowed eyes. Even from this distance Sam could sense the vampire's cat-like eyes burning holes into him. Suddenly the vamp was gone, and Sam gasped as it appeared right in front of Sam's face. Up close Sam could see his pallid face with high protruding cheekbones, and his translucent skin with blue veins coiled underneath. His hair were spiky and pointed upwards at the 2 ends on either side of his head. Sam stared calmly back into the vamp's gleaming eyes. I hear you have been looking for me, the vamp spoke, and although it was speaking calmly, Sam flinched at the eerie voice. I can kill you right now for taking the lives of so many of my children, or I could turn you. It would be a waste to destroy something so beautiful. The vamp continued talking as he began to pace in front of Sam. I need your help, my brother, he's trapped in purgatory, and I was told that you can get him out, Sam asked, not able to hide how desperate he was. The vampire glared at him. Why should I help a pathetic human like you? The vampire paused to consider him. No, you're worse than human, a hunter. Sam gritted his teeth. He had always thought about the alpha vampire as calm and calculative, so Sam had assumed that he would be able to strike some sort of deal with the alpha vamp. However, this elder vamp was a whole new level of freak, and Sam had no idea how strong this vamp was, or if he was willing to reason. Did you really think that the vampire that piece of crap Crowley had kidnapped could be the father, the progenitor of all vampires? The vampire asked fiercely. What, can you get my brother out of purgatory or not? Sam asked stubbornly. He was not afraid of some stupid vamp. He had taken on the devil himself, and he was sure that he could handle anything right now. Getting a mere human out of purgatory is child's play for me. The vampire let out an amused chuckle. But why would I do that? Sam was so relieved to hear that there was a way to get Dean out. He began to feel happier than he had ever felt in the past 6 months. Maybe we can make some sort of deal, Sam said quietly, desperately hoping that the vamp would just take a bag of his blood and let Dean out. But the vampire laughed. That laugh sent shivers down Sam's spine, but he kept his face stoic. There is nothing that a mere human like yourself can offer me. The only reason that you are alive is because I am thinking about the most painful way by which you will meet your demise. Sam gulped and felt anger flare up in his chest. He arled at the vampire. I have killed hundreds of you blood-sucking freaks, and I think you'll be joining them soon. The vampire was in Sam's face in an instant and gripped his chin. You amuse me, Samuel. I have not seen such loyalty for quite a while, and believe me when I say that I have seen a lot. But you will not speak to me in that tone again. My dear, the vamp called out, and a girl with long black hair and big blue eyes walked in. She seemed so innocent, but Sam knew what was hidden underneath all that innocence. A pair of pointy teeth. Why don't you teach our guest a lesson? The elder vampire said to the girl in a gentle, affectionate tone. Yes, Master Case. Case, so that was the vamp's name. Suddenly the girl leapt at Sam and sunk her teeth into him. Sam cried out in pain as he felt razor-sharp needles pierce the skin of his neck. He pulled against the ropes fruitlessly, and he screamed as the girl pushed even more forcefully. He could feel blood trickle down his neck. Stop. The alpha vampire commanded. Maya, stop. But the girl did not stop, and Sam started to feel lightheaded. Suddenly she was pulled off, and Sam saw Case holding the girl by her long black hair, a look of rage in his eyes. Maya whimpered in his grasp, and Case pushed her away, causing her to fall to the floor. Sam felt sick when he saw his blood clinging to her lips. Sam was panting heavily and gasped when the elder vamp was once again in his face, but the vamp looked surprised, and to Sam's disgust, he began to sniff Sam and inhale deeply. Your blood, it's different, he said. His eyes were fixed on the blood trail making its way down Sam's neck. Case licked his lips, drawing close to Sam. Sam closed his eyes, preparing himself for another set of fangs, but suddenly his hands were free, and he was holding a white cloth in his hands. Sam hadn't seen the vamp move, but he felt the air swoosh around him and the vampire disappear to reappear somewhere else. The vamp was once again sitting at his desk in the same manner as before, but unlike before his eyes had a sudden curiosity. Sam applied the cloth to his wound to stop the bleeding. His exhaustion, plus the blood loss, made his mind foggy. Fine, I'll help you get your brother out of purgatory. Sam blinked at the vampire. Was he actually hearing this right? This crazy vampire was actually going to help Dean. But the vampire was gonna want something in return, his blood most probably. I suppose you want my blood in return, Sam asked, hoping that the vampire would connect an IV, fill a few bags, and then Sam would be on his merry way taking Dean along with him, but he knew that things wouldn't be as simple as that. Case nodded, smiling at Sam. Sam wanted to get straight to business. How are you going to get my brother out? Do I have to go purgatory or? It is not that simple, Samuel, and no, you don't have to step inside purgatory. I will send one of my own into purgatory, one who knows the location of all the portals. Once he locates your brother, he will take your brother to the nearest portal to this dimension. Sam did not like the idea of sending some vamp after Dean, and he was 100% sure that Dean would behead the vamp as soon as he sees it. Let me go with your vampire inside purgatory to get my brother out. The vampire smiled at Sam. Samuel, the way for one of my own to get into purgatory is to die. I give you my word that I will get your brother out, but I need your word that until that time you will do as I say, and you will remain here with me. Sam paused to think for a moment. The idea of staying with a creepy vampire was one that he would never have accepted, but right now he was desperate. Dean had been in that hellhole for too damn long, and if the roles were reversed, Dean would have done anything to get Sam out. Alright, whatever your condition is, I accept it. But I want my brother out as soon as possible. The vamp nodded at Sam. Maya, fetch me Benny Lafitte. Sam had completely forgotten about the girl. She nodded and went towards the hallway, but paused. I didn't mean to disobey, I wanted to stop, but his blood. Maya, I do not want to hear your useless babbling. You have no excuse. You have been by my side almost as long as Tesla, yet you behave like a pathetic fledgling. The vampire spat. Now do as you are told. The girl quickly scrambled out of the room, and a few minutes later she came back with a man wearing a navy blue sailor's coat. He bowed a little to Caius when he came into the room. Ah, Benny, you are to rescue a human from purgatory, Dean Winchester. Since you have been to that realm once, you know all the exit routes. Are you willing to do this for your sire? Of course, Benny answered in his honey-coated voice. My remains. Louisiana, Caius answered. Look, when you meet my brother, don't tell him anything about our deal. Sam said, turning to Benny, who nodded. Sam turned around to speak to the elder vamp, but frowned when he found the table empty. Suddenly there was a loud, sickening crack, and Sam spun around to see Benny lying on the floor with his head twisted and Caius standing next to him. Well, Samuel, now we have to wait for your brother to arrive, and until that time you are mine. Caius said, and in an instant he was standing in front of Sam again, and the look in the vamp's eyes sent chills down Sam's spine. This is not good, Sam thought, not freaking good at all. All that he could hope for was for Dean to get out of purgatory quickly. Alright, here's your room. The blonde-haired vampire that Sam had met in the bar stopped in front of a door in the twisted hallway. Sam had tried to remember the way from the dome-shaped circular room, but there had been so many turns through lamplit windowless hallways that Sam had forgotten the way. Sam entered his room. It was a huge room, and Sam, who had spent most of his time in stinky, stained and dirty motel rooms, felt a little tinge of excitement in staying in this beautiful room. There was a huge, king-size bed with one wall and a huge dressing table in the other, but not a single window. I'm Tesla, by the way, said the blonde-haired vampire who was leaning against the doorway. You will find all your stuff already in the closet. Of course we took out your weapons and your cell phone, but you can keep your laptop. Why did you take my cell phone? It's not like I'm gonna call someone to get me out of here. I am here on my free will, Sam said angrily. Tesla shrugged. Sam sat down on the bed. So I still don't get it. I mean, the alpha vamp that we thought was the first vampire, the first one. How come we haven't heard about this Chaos guy before? Sam asked. Tesla shook his head. Master Chaos made him the alpha vamp because owning and running an empire didn't. Tesla frowned, hesitating in how he phrased the next thing he was going to say. Amuse him anymore. There was a time once when he was in place of the alpha vamp, but he didn't want to be involved with the hunters and demons and all the politics, so instead he gave his name to his most trusted child and secluded himself a long time ago. Sam nodded. So what now? What changed? Sam asked. Well, the alpha vamp, as you hunters call him, over the passage of time, deluded himself and took his borrowed title too seriously. Master Chaos called upon him to discuss some important matter, and he showed up with an army of his strongest and oldest vampires. But of course they did not stand a chance before Master Chaos's wrath. They all were indirectly sired to Master Chaos, so they instead turned on the alpha vamp. Tesla finished. So, do you know anything about my brother? When he will be back? No, Sam, I do not, and you should get some rest. You will need it. It seems you are special. Master Chaos has never made a deal with humans before. Tesla paused, looking at Sam with a strange look. You better take care of that wound. Saying this he stepped out. However, before he left he spoke once more. Oh, and you better get used to our timings, like sleeping in the day and waking and eating in the night. He left and closed the door behind him. Sam sighed as he slumped into the bed. He just hoped that time will pass quickly like the last 6 months. What if this elder vamp was lying and there was no way to get Dean out? But if he really was lying, then why did he twist that vamp's neck? If there was a portal, then Dean would have found it on his own, and how will that vampire get Dean to trust him without telling him about Sam's deal? Sam's head began to spin at the idea of Dean finding out that Sam had yet again made a deal with the monster behind his back. No, Dean can never know about this deal. Nodding to himself, he got up to dress his wound and was not surprised to see the bathroom stocked with supplies. He changed, took 2 painkillers and drifted easily into sleep. And then, the elder vampire stepped quietly into the room and sat at the chair beside the bed. The young man was sound asleep, and he resisted the urge to brush away Sam's bangs from his eyes. He knew that the young man would immediately wake up because of his hunter instincts. Chaos had never thought that the sight of a mere human could cause him this much anticipation. His eyes lingered on the dress wound on Sam's neck, and he felt a sudden rage inside of him. How could Maya lose control like that, as if she was just a newly turned vampire? Perhaps he would also lose control when he would taste Sam's blood. Patience, he told himself, you have all the time in the world, and if Samuel really is capable of sustaining your influence, then you have to be careful around him. The young man fidgeted in his sleep and his eyes twitched. His lips were set in a hard line as if he was having a nightmare. Not able to control himself, he carefully and gently began to guide his fingers through Samuel's hair, and smiled when the young man visibly relaxed. Oh, this will be so much fun, he thought to himself, and in a flash he was out of the room. Sam woke up with a jolt and reached under the pillow to take out his gun. When he couldn't find it, his heart thudded loudly in his chest. He had been sure that someone had been in the room. Where the hell was his gun? Suddenly he remembered with a pang in his stomach that he was not in a motel room, but in some creepy vamp's lair. He had thought for a moment that Dean had been here with him. Usually thinking about his brother caused a feeling of overwhelming grief to wash over him. This time though, hope sputtered through. Soon enough his brother would be out of purgatory. And then, it had been 4 days with Sam locked up in the room, and he was beginning to feel like a prisoner. Tesla would bring food 3 times in the night, but Sam still couldn't get used to having breakfast at midnight. Even if there were no windows to indicate the time whether it was day or night, Sam still had his watch. He was beginning to miss sunlight and the sky. He had asked Tesla to take him outside, but every time the vampire would shake his head in denial. Despite being a vampire, Sam had grown to like Tesla, who was very talkative and calm. He would always answer Sam's questions patiently, well, most of them anyway, and Tesla had also agreed to bring Sam some books to pass the time. Sam was quite glad that the elder vamp Chaos had not visited him even once. There was something about that vamp that sent shivers down Sam's spine. Those cat-like and gleaming eyes may have been the reason. Sam shrugged as he read some notes on his laptop about purgatory that he had made a few months ago. He closed the window on his laptop, choosing instead to stare at Amelia and Riot's picture that he had on his desktop. He had last seen her about 3 weeks ago, and he was beginning to miss her already. He glanced at his watch. It was almost midnight, so Tesla should be arriving soon. These few days had done Sam some good. He was feeling healthier than he had in last 6 months. Maybe it was because he was hopeful for the first time about seeing Dean, or maybe it was because of sleep and 3 whole meals he had been having each day or night. The door opened and Tesla came in, but he had no breakfast tray in his hands. Sam, come on, follow me, he said as he left the room. Wow, it feels so good to be out of that friggin' room, Sam thought, as he followed Tesla once again through the passageways. Where are we going, Tesla? Sam asked, but the vamp did not reply. Instead, he paused at a door and opened it, motioning Sam to go inside. It was a huge room with a long table and a huge crystal chandelier which hung in the center, illuminating the whole room. At one end of the table sat the elder vamp, clad in black from head to toe. He motioned Sam to sit beside him on the chair closest to the head chair. Sam reluctantly went, even though he wanted to sit as far as possible from the monster. If he could have his way, he'd be running from the room, but he continued to remind himself that he was doing this for Dean. Samuel, you look quite well and your wound is also completely healed. Yeah, and I will continue to feel well if my blood remains inside of me, Sam said quietly. The vamp smiled at him. We both know that is not going to happen. Any news on my brother? Tesla told me that you are, somehow connected to all your turned vampires. So maybe you would know if Benny has found Dean. Benny will contact me when he finds your brother, since he was directly turned by me. Yes, our bond is very strong. Now, Samuel, eat. Sam hesitantly ate some toast and chicken, since Caius was staring at him the whole time. When he had finished, Caius held out his questioningly raised his eyebrows at him. Your wrist, Samuel, Caius said patiently. Sam gulped and nodded. As soon as he placed his wrist in Caius's palm, something very weird happened. It felt as if an electric shock passed through his whole body, and his sensory nerves ignited at the points where Caius was touching him. Shuddering, Sam reflexively pulled his wrist away with a jerk. He could tell that the vampire had felt their connection too, since he looked a little surprised. The surprise immediately turned into glee as the vampire beamed at him, his smile reaching his gleaming eyes. Let's try that again, Samuel. Well, can't you take my blood through an IV? It will be a lot easier that way. The vamp shook his head. That wouldn't be fun, Samuel. You felt that, didn't you? I have never felt that way before, Samuel. You don't realize how tempting I find you. The vamp leered at Sam as he held out his hand once again. Your wrist, Samuel, he said a little sternly this time. Sam sighed and reluctantly placed his wrist in the vamp's hand. This time he was ready for the shock and the sudden goosebumps. It didn't hurt, but his heart thudded loudly in his chest, and every single instinct was yelling at him to bolt for the door. The vamp picked up a knife and made a small cut in his wrist, and then placed a glass goblet underneath the bleeding cut. The blood flowed slowly and Sam waited impatiently. However, after a few minutes with a very small amount of blood in the goblet, the vamp let go of Sam's wrist, and Sam suddenly felt as if a huge pressure had been removed from his body, and he breathed out. He hadn't realized that he had been holding his breath since the time Caius had caught hold of his wrist. This will do for now, the vamp said as he raised the goblet to his nose and inhaled deeply. Then he took a small sip, licking his lips. Ah, how refreshing, he said as he traced the rim of the goblet with his long finger. Sam couldn't understand why he was reacting this way. He had been bitten by vampires before quite a lot of times, but never before had he reacted this way under a vampire's touch. The experience scared him. No, he told himself, he had to man up and stop behaving like a scared little girl. He had been in the cage with Lucifer, he had been tortured by the devil. There should be no problem in dealing with a vampire who had taken a fancy to his blood. What are you thinking, Samuel? The vamp asked. He had finished the blood and had been staring at Sam while Sam was lost in his thoughts. What happened just now? Did you do something? Samuel, I told you I have never felt this way before. Perhaps it is because of your tainted blood, or, I should say, demon blood. How did you know? Sam asked in surprise. Well, I tasted it, didn't I? I have tasted demon blood before. It is poisonous to our kind, but not your blood. Your blood is. The vampire paused, searching for words to describe the experience. It makes me feel powerful. It's just, I should say, exquisite, the vamp finished with a contented sigh. As much as I like hearing endearing qualities about my blood, I would like to go back to my room now. Sam said sarcastically. He wanted to get as far away from this vamp as possible, but deep down he knew that their encounters were going to become more frequent. Sam shuddered at the thought of the freaky vampire clinging to his neck. The vampire nodded. Don't worry, Samuel, soon you will give in to this overwhelming feeling, and you will come to enjoy my company. For now I will let you retire. Sam nodded and got up. Tesla was waiting at the door, and he began to lead Sam to his room. Enjoy his company, yeah right, as if Sam was ever gonna enjoy a crazy vampire's company. Once Dean got back, he would make sure that they get this son of a bitch and cut off his head. For now Sam would have to endure this stay, for Dean. And then, as soon as Samuel left the room, the elder vampire picked up the goblet and held it high above his mouth, so that the remaining few drops of blood slid into his mouth and melted on his tongue. The rich flavor quickly dissolved in his mouth, and he licked his lips. It had been a long while since he had felt this way. It was like remembering the time when he had first tasted blood. Samuel's blood brought those feelings back, those feelings that he thought had eroded along with the passage of time. For the first time in eons he felt a desire to live for something. He had grown tired of his monotonous life, but now finally he was experiencing something that he could call strange, something pristine. The pit of his stomach quivered in anticipation as he thought about exploring what else he could achieve from this unique connection. Perhaps he could enter young Samuel's mind. He had tried his abilities before on other humans, but they would always end up insane or dead. Could he risk it with Samuel? Deciding that he could, the vampire couldn't help but think that Samuel was different. It was something he could feel in his bones. But for now he would give Samuel some time. He chuckled. It what he like his prize would be going anywhere soon. Purgatory was a vast dimension. It would most probably take months for Benny to find the human if the human is still alive, that is to say. So should I continue writing, or is the story getting kinda weird? The next week passed quietly, and by now Sam had gotten used to his midnight breakfast. On top of that, he had actually started sleeping in the day. Sam currently was lying on the bed reading one of the books that Tesla had bought him. However, his attention was on something else. No matter what he did, he couldn't keep his mind off that freaky elder vamp. The penetrating eyes seemed to be in every shadow, and that cold, controlled voice never left his thoughts. There was a soft knock on the door, and Tesla came in with the second tray that day, or rather that night. So are you Case's personal servant or something? I mean, why don't Maya or some other vamp bring me food? Sam asked as he peered into the tray, happy to see a bowl of salad. Tesla looked angry. Sam, the only reason that I am bringing you food is that because Master Case trusts me around you. I am far more experienced and superior than other vampires, and I have been by Master Case's side from the very beginning. I am sure you haven't forgotten how Maya lost control feeding on you. She might have broken your neck if she was not pulled off. And I might have broken her neck if my hands hadn't been tied around that pillar. Sam smirked, eating his salad as Tesla leaned against the doorway. His blonde hair almost seemed as pale as his skin. Hey Tesla, I really want to go outside, man. It's not like I'm gonna run away or something as long as my brother's stuck in purgatory. Tesla shrugged. Why do you want to go outside? You have everything you want right here. If there is anything else you need, I can bring it. Sam shook his head. Look, I just want to have a stroll in the sun. Tesla seemed unconvinced. Sam let out a sigh of frustration. You wouldn't understand. I'm not a vampire like you, and being crammed in this room for about 2 weeks is driving me crazy. What does it feel like? Tesla asked, his normally bored expression curious all of a sudden. What? Sam asked as he finished his salad. The sun. What does it feel like? Sam was momentarily confused by the question. He frowned as he thought about how to answer what seemed like a question anyone would know the answer to. Warm, I guess. Sam replied, but the vampire did not seem to be satisfied as he shook his head. Explain it to me. Well, Sam started, thinking about a good response. It feels as if the light from the sun is crawling up every inch of your skin, and as it shines upon you it relaxes you, eases away the tension in your muscles. Then a friendly feeling of warmth envelops you. It makes you feel as if you have nothing to worry about, and momentarily you get lost in that familiar warmth. Sam looked at Tesla, feeling a little stupid about his speech. He expected Tesla to laugh at him, but the vampire seemed lost in thought. I wish I could feel that way again, Tesla said as he shrugged, looking pensive. He then picked up the empty tray and left the room, locking the door behind him. Sam sighed as he slumped into the bed and decided to take a nap, kicking off his shoes that he had put on at midnight. SNS. Sam woke up when he felt someone stroking his hair. Amelia, he thought, and smiled, but when he opened his eyes, he gasped and quickly slid off the bed, landing on the other side on the floor. Case was sitting in the sofa besides the bed and was smiling oddly. What are you doing here? Sam asked angrily as he nervously shifted his weight on the balls of his feet. He was thanking God that he was not sleeping in his boxers. The vamp raised an eyebrow at him. It is my mansion. I can go wherever I please. What do you want? Sam asked, although he already knew the answer. In a flash, the vamp was sitting on the edge of the bed facing Sam, who kept his ground and tried to look calm. The vamp patted the edge of the bed beside him, motioning Sam to sit down. Sam shook his head. Look, we made a deal about my blood, so you can take it in a blood bag. Take as much as you want. Sam said as coldly and calmly as he could while staring head-on into the vamp's cat-like gleaming eyes. Case frowned at him. No, Samuel, you do not remember correctly. We made a deal that I can do whatever I want with you as I please, and you, in a desperate haste to save your brother, fully complied. Sam gritted his teeth and sighed as he sat on the bed besides the vampire. The vamp leaned over, effing his neck, and Sam tensed, restraining himself from jerking away. Samuel, relax a bit. Your blood is thundering so loudly in my ears. This is becoming difficult to think straight. Why don't you relax? How can I relax with you sitting beside me? Especially when all I want to do is cut your head off. Sam said this while staring at the wall and not looking at the vamp. Case continued to sidle closer to him, eyes boring into him. Look, let's just get this over with, Sam said as he raised his wrist and held it towards the vamp. The vamp took hold of Sam's wrist, and at once a sudden shock passed through Sam's body, raising his hair at the back of his neck. His nerve fibers felt like they were igniting and spiraling under the vamp's touch. Case turned and faced Sam, who was still staring at the wall. The vamp was now sitting with one leg folded underneath him on the bed. Sam felt fangs pierce his skin, and he let out a gasp, not because of the pain, but because of the sudden lightning that sparked in his mind. It felt as if he could feel the vampire's happiness and lust in his own mind, and he began to push the vamp out of his mind. He tried to pull his wrist away, but the vamp had it clutched with both his hands. Sam screamed when he felt the vamp pushing in his mind again, and his skull felt as if it was going to explode from the inside. He closed his eyes and placed one hand on the vamp's shoulder to push him away, but the vamp easily caught hold of his other wrist. Stop resisting, Samuel. Sam stopped fighting as his eyes flew open to see that the vampire was still sucking his blood. He realized in horror that he had felt the vamp's voice in his mind. Once again he felt the vamp forcing his way in, breaking into Sam's thoughts, urging Sam to give up and stop fighting him. Sam felt his skull throb with unbelievable pain, a pain much more intense than the pain he used to have during his visions. Stop it, Sam screamed. This time Caius listened and he felt the hymn withdraw from his wrist. At once Sam went limp as if a cord had been disconnected in his mind, and a heavy burden had been removed from his shoulders. Exhausted, he began to fall face down towards the floor, and in an instant he was lying on the bed, face up, with the vamp sitting on the edge of the bed staring down at him. The pain in Sam's head continued to rage on, and he couldn't stop himself from shaking. He couldn't even pull his wrist away when he felt the vamp lick the wounds dry. Sam shuddered every time the vamp would lick his wrists, the motion a mix between lust and worship. As the pain in his head redoubled, he moaned and succumbed to darkness, even though his mind was screaming inside to stay awake and not to sleep in the presence of the elder vamp. SNS. The elder vamp continued to lick the holes that he had pierced into Sam's skin, only pausing when he heard the young man moan. He then resumed licking. Caius felt Sam's tense limb go slack and knew that Samuel was unconscious. Drawing away to look at his prize, he couldn't believe what had happened just then. He had entered Samuel's mind. He had expected to relish a few memories, to delve in and explore at his leisure. But instead he had never gotten the chance. Samuel had fought his presence and actually been successful. He never knew how strong this being was, and even he himself, the Ancient One, was feeling flustered by being in contact with that much power. And oh, what a sweet sensation it was just to enter his mind, however short the duration may be, because he had never expected Samuel to put up a fight and resist him for as long as he did. His lips twitched when he fought the urge to bite into Sam again, to feel that surge of electrifying exhilaration at the connection. The intoxicating and overwhelming feeling he got when he bit into Samuel's skin was still lingering in his mind, leaving him in a dazed state. Perhaps it wouldn't hurt to have a little more. He lovingly brushed away Samuel's hair from his eyes and bent down, his face just inches away from his prize. He could hear the steady flow of blood through Sam's veins. It was like the blood was singing to him, calling him, and the sweet steady beat of Sam's heart was like a melodious song, a siren's call of pleasure. He licked a stripe down Sam's neck. He wanted to look into those hazel eyes. He wanted Samuel to be awake and feel the moment with him. Perhaps now that Samuel was in a weakened state, it would be easier for him to enter his mind. He licked Sam's cheek and bit softly into his neck, causing the young man to groan in his sleep. Slowly and easily, as the overwhelming taste of Samuel's blood enveloped him, he began to enter Sam's mind. But even in his vulnerable state there were barriers. He caught a glimpse of a black-haired girl along with a shabby dog, and he relished the feelings of love, home and comfort, which radiated from the young man to soak into his own mind. He leapt onto the bed over Sam's unconscious body, and called out into Sam's mind. "Samuel, wake up." Immediately those beautiful hazel eyes flew open. First he blinked and then his eyes went white with terror. Sam began thrashing around, trying to get off the bed and away from the insidious presence of the elder. But the elder one had no trouble in pinning the boy's arms to the headboard of the bed, and pressing his body up against Sam's, to keep him still. "Wah, get the hell off me," Sam cried out. But Caius just chuckled as he felt the boy fruitlessly trying to push him off. Then Sam finally stopped thrashing and looked terrified, back into his eyes. This was the moment the elder vampire had been waiting for, the moment for Samuel to realize how helpless he was, and to whom he belonged to. "Get off me," Sam cried out again, this time pleadingly. The elder one bent down, his face inches away from Sam's, and then he began to lick the wounds he had pierced earlier on Sam's neck. He frowned when he felt feelings of disgust coming from the young man and licked more forcefully. He was sure he had felt a trace of pleasure. "Stop. Get the hell off me, you freak," Sam said while panting. Caius raised his head and looked innocently into Sam's face, and then he leaned in close and whispered into Sam's ear. "Soon you will have no choice but to obey me, Samuel. You will resist at first, but for how long can your feeble mind resist my entry?" And then he left the room in a flash, savoring the taste of blood still lingering on his tongue. SNS. As soon as Sam felt Caius get off the bed, he scrambled off and ran towards the wall, expecting the vamp to pin him again. He sighed in relief when he saw that the vamp had left the room. Panting heavily, he began to feel the effects as the adrenaline wore off. His knees buckled and he slid down against the wall. His mind was swirling with confusion. What the hell had happened? He had never once encountered a vampire before. That could. What the hell had the alpha vampire done? Spoken into Sam's mind. Sam felt like sobbing, terror clawing at his throat and causing his eyes to prick with tears. It felt as if he had been violated, as if the vamp had touched his very mind and soiled it. Sam clutched his hands to stop them from shaking as he pulled his knees towards him. How the hell did I end up here? He began to have a mental conversation with himself, trying to calm down. What the hell was I thinking agreeing to become a blood bag for some crazy vamp? Sam took a deep breath. No, I have to do this, I'm doing this for Dean. Like you were killing Lilith for Dean, a voice much like Dean zapped back at him. No, this is different, he told that voice. This time I may actually manage to get Dean out. I'm not doing anything wrong. Like you weren't doing anything wrong drinking demon blood and making out with a friggin' demon. The little voice in his head said. How different is a demon and a vampire? Dean would be so disappointed when he came back. Dean don't he have to know anything, and if he does find out, he'll understand that I did this for him. You know this idea, right? Just like drinking demon blood didn't feel, you should have killed that vamp when you first saw it, instead you end up becoming its bitch. Sam shook his head to get rid of that annoying voice, but that sounded so much like Dean's, as it continued to ap at him. And what proof do you have that the vamp is actually gonna keep its word? For all you know, he just twisted another vamp's neck in front of you, and you end up trusting a monster again, just like you trusted Ruby. Sam began to rub his temples as the relentless pain in his head continued to throb on. How much of this could he take without breaking? Please Dean, wherever you are, come quickly. He thought as he staggered to the bed and immediately fell asleep, hoping that the elder vampire wouldn't be there the next time he opened his eyes. Sam woke up with a jolt and scrambled out of the bed when he heard the door open. He relaxed when he saw that it was just Tesla holding a tray, a bored expression on his face. Tesla placed the tray on the table by the door next to a second tray that Sam noticed was already on the table. Tesla frowned at the older tray. You haven't eaten, he said coolly to Sam. Sam sat on the bed and rubbed his temples. Thankfully the pain in his head had ebbed down to a dull ache. Yeah, I just woke up, Sam told him. Tesla raised an eyebrow at him. You have been sleeping for more than 24 hours straight. Sam glanced at his watch. It was 2 o'clock and, again, due to lack of windows, he didn't know if it was morning or afternoon. However, since Tesla was here, it probably meant that it was early morning. Are you feeling ill? Tesla asked him as he went to lean by the door at his usual spot. Why would I feel good when your buddy Caius has made me his personal blood bag? Oh, and not just that, he decided to take a walk through my head too. Sam said angrily, glaring at Tesla who was suddenly standing straight, his bored expression gone. What? Sam apped at him as Tesla stared in awe. Sam frowned at the vampire as he walked up to the table to grab the fresh tray. Look, can you just get the hell out of my room? It's not, Sam began, but Tesla interrupted him. You're saying that Master Caius entered your mind? As in you could hear his voice in your head? Tesla asked with surprise. Yeah, I guess one of the perks of being the elder vamp, Sam said miserably as he placed the tray back down. He had lost his appetite on remembering his unfortunate experience with the elder vamp. Incredible. Tesla rasped. What? Sam asked confused. I have seen Master Caius smell within another human's mind before many times, but the humans have always ended up dead just after a few seconds of being in contact with him. The unfortunate beings bleed from their ears, nose, even eyes. Tesla looked at him curiously. Yet you somehow resisted all that, and apart from oversleeping, you have shown no other side effects. Sam gulped as he imagined innocent people bleeding to death the way Tesla had described. If the humans died, then why didn't he stop? Why keep doing it over again? Sam asked as he clenched his fists. He should have killed that bastard. Well, Tesla said, thinking. For pleasure, I suppose. Tesla answered, completely unfazed by Sam's apparent anger. His trademark bored expression was back on his face, as he once again leaned by the doorway. He gets pleasure in seeing people bleed to death. Sam asked wide-eyed, shaking with fury as he came to stand in Tesla's face. He wished that he could knock that smug expression off of the vamp's face. Tesla simply shook his head to get his blonde hair out of his eyes, and answered Sam. No, Sam, you don't understand. He paused as if thinking about what to tell Sam. He gets pleasure from their memories, their feelings, their fear, love, hate. Humans fascinate him. And he told you all this, Sam asked, and Tesla noted. What I don't understand is, Sam, how are you different from the others? Why you didn't bleed to death? Tesla pondered as he passed by Sam and picked up the old tray. I guess I'm different because I'm the one who's gonna chop that bastard's head off. Tesla laughed at him. Do you really think that hunters before you haven't tried? Master Caius can't be killed. Everything can be killed. We killed his creator. Do you really think that we can't kill him? Sam, why do you say we? I suppose you are referring to your brother. Have you forgotten that Master Caius is the one who can get him out? Sam sighed and went to sit on the bed. Tesla was right. As long as Dean was in purgatory, he had to stay here. But what if he did manage to kill Caius? Then Caius wouldn't be able to tell Benny to stop looking for Dean, and Benny might be able to still get Dean out. You should eat something, Sam. You need your strength. Tesla said as he started towards the door. Wait, Tesla. Sam said, standing up and heading for the door. Tesla looked at him questioningly. Caius has already sent Benny after Dean, so I have no reason to stay here. Benny will get Dean out anyway. Tesla smiled in amusement. Benny is directly sire to Master Caius, which means that he can be told to stop looking for your brother, even if he is in another dimension. As you said earlier, Sam, one of the perks of being the elder vamp. Chuckling to himself, Tesla left the room, leaving a defeated Sam behind. Sam picked up the tray and forced himself to eat. If Case was going to claw into his mind again, he would need every ounce of his strength to stop that bastard. Surprisingly, the next few days passed without any encounters with the Elder Vamp. Sam kept track of the time and his days in his prison room. Almost 2 weeks had passed by and Dean had been in purgatory for almost 7 months now. Sam couldn't imagine what Dean must be going through. He just hoped that Dean would still be the same Dean when he got back. Sam closed the laptop, tired of going through the notes on purgatory over and over again. It was like they were helping him. Just then the door opened. His heart thudded loudly in his chest when he saw the Elder Vamp once again in his room. The vamp was leaning by the door in Tesla's spot. Sam tried to remain calm and slowly got up from the bed. He stood up to get in a fighting stance, in case the vamp was thinking of leaping on him again. But the vamp continued to look at him sadly. "You back to claw through my head again?" Sam asked angrily, and the vamp shook his head. "I am afraid I have bad news for you, Samuel." At once Sam's heart leapt out of his chest in fear for Dean. Did something happen to Dean? Tesla had told him that the vamp had contact with Benny. Did Benny tell Case that Dean is no? He couldn't think that way, not when he was so close to seeing Dean again. "Is this about my brother?" Sam asked, hoping that it was otherwise, but the vamp nodded. "Samuel, your brother is dead. Benny killed him, I saw it with my own eyes," the vamp said coolly, and Sam at once ran towards Case, roughly grabbing him by his collar. He looked directly into those red gleaming eyes that he loathed so much. The vamp simply stared back at him. "You're lying," Sam whirled, gripping the collar more tightly until his knuckles ached. "You're lying," he repeated. The vamp looked at him sadly, as if pitying him. He effortlessly and gently removed Sam's grip from his collar and pushed Sam backwards. In an instant he was gone and the door was locked once again. Sam slammed his shoulder against the door, again and again, shouting all the while. Tears streamed down his face, and images of Dean dying flew into his mind, playing over and over again. Dean dying, with the disappointment that Sam couldn't get him out. Or worse, the belief that Sam hadn't even tried to save him. "No, he's not dead." Sam screamed at the door, hitting it again and again. Finally, after his shoulder ached so much that he couldn't feel it anymore, he slumped to the floor. Exhaustion replaced his rage and he crumpled in on himself. What would the vamp get from lying to him? Why would he lie? Sam was a prisoner here. The vamp could do anything he wanted. So was he telling the truth? Sam began to shake with rage again. "I'm gonna kill that bastard," he thought as he crawled towards the bed. He got down underneath it and felt the wooden planks underneath the wooden board over which the mattress was placed. Turning himself around, he started kicking at the plank in the middle of the bed with all the strength he could muster. He didn't stop until he heard a crack. The plank had broken in the middle, splitting into 2 pieces. The ends were still attached to the bed, and he started twisting the free end. He didn't care when the splinters cut into his hand. All he could think about was Dean. After working on the plank for about 15 minutes, he had it in his hands. Its one end had sharp protruding splinters. Sam knew that the vampire would come after him again, and this time Sam would stab it in the heart. After working it until his fingers were a painful, bleeding mess, he unscrewed a bolt and began to carve the end of his stake. He knew that the stake would not kill the vamp, but it would slow it down. Possibly give Sam enough time to make it out of this hellhole. He remembered his father's words back when they were going after the cult. It seemed to be another life now. Most vampire lore is crap. The cross won't repel them. Sunlight won't kill them, and neither will a stake to the heart. He couldn't stop seeing the flashes of Dean dying over and over again, and Crowley's words came flying to him. "Looks like you're well and truly on your own." No, he was not alone. Dean couldn't be dead. Why would Benny kill him in the first place? Benny was sent to bring Dean back. Could it have been in self-defense? Did Dean attack Benny? But how could he trust the vamp's word? What reason would the vamp have to lie to him though? Sam blinked away the tears in his eyes. Dean had to be alive, he had to be. Dean Winchester couldn't die at the hands of a lowly vampire. One thing was certain though, Sam couldn't stay in this place anymore. Suddenly he heard footsteps outside the door, and he quickly ran to stand behind it with the sharp wooden stake in his hand. He hoped that it was the Elder Vamp and not Tesla. As soon as the door opened, Sam jumped from his hiding spot and slammed it into the person who had opened the door. It was the Elder Vamp, and Sam couldn't believe that he had stabbed the vamp right in the heart. The vamp seemed shocked, and he growled in pain as Sam twisted the plank. Sam smiled in satisfaction as the vamp kept groaning, but the groan turned into a cold, menacing laugh. Sam backed away shocked. He had expected the vamp to at least stagger a little. In his anger and rage, he had forgotten about Tesla telling him that the Elder Vamp couldn't be killed, so how could a stake affect him? "Samuel, my children might have been knocked out by a stake to the heart, but not me," Case said, easily removing the plank as if it was a tiny thorn in his skin. "I am the Ancient One himself. I am immortal in the true sense. I cannot be killed, Samuel." The vamp continued to slowly move towards Sam, who backpedaled and turned around, trying to make sure that the vamp couldn't corner him. The plank slipped from the vamp's hand to the floor and fell with a dull thud, its end slick with the elder vamp's blood. Many have tried to kill me before, and there was once a time that even I myself wanted to meet my maker. Sick of my eternal life, I tried to kill myself. I wanted to feel what dying felt like. Having seen it in the eyes of so many that died at my hand, I wanted to experience that for myself. But I failed, and I am more than glad I failed. Sam gasped as he felt a tight grip on his neck, and he caught a glimpse of the red gleaming eyes. In the next second the vamp was back where he was before, and had it not been for the bruise on his neck, Sam would have thought that he had imagined the vamp in his face. I'm glad, Samuel, that I failed, because if I had died I would never have met you. Sam groaned as he was mercilessly slammed into the wall by the elder vamp. The elder vamp chuckled as he effortlessly lifted Sam up by his throat. At once Sam grabbed the vamp's hand, which was around his throat, as he gasped for air. His efforts were futile, however, as the hand seemed to be made of steel and had an iron grip. Before Sam could pass out from lack of air, the vamp released his hold, and Sam dropped to the floor, panting and gasping for breath. But Case was not done with him. The vamp lifted him up by the front of his shirt. Sam tried to punch him, but Case easily blocked his punch and twisted his arm. Sam cried out in pain, but the vamp did not dislocate his shoulder, rather he pulled Sam away from the wall and pinned Sam's arm behind him. After that he slammed Sam to the wall again with Sam's arm trapped between his body and the wall. The vamp caught Sam's other wrist and dug his fangs into it. Once again Sam felt the familiar sensation, as if his senses of touch, sound, taste, sight and smell had been heightened to 100 times their capacity. He felt a shock travel through his entire body, igniting from the vamp's touch, and he prepared himself for the vamp to enter his mind. However, he did not feel the vamp's presence. Case withdrew from the Sam's wrist and pinned it above Sam's head before licking the blood away from his lips. He arled in Sam's face. The fight seemed to die in Sam at that moment, and this time Sam didn't feel scared. He didn't care what happened to him anymore. Dean was not here. He may as well be dead. Sam would rather die than live in this miserable world without his big brother. He had also considered the possibility that if Dean was indeed trapped in purgatory, with no way out, then Sam would rather be turned into a vampire and kill himself to join his brother. So right now he didn't care what the vamp did to him, and he looked back expressionless into the elder vampire's face. Samuel, I have treated you like a guest. I have killed one of my own in pursuit of finding your brother, and yet you slammed a stake into my heart. The vamp said, leaning in close and whispering into Sam's ear. For that you must be punished. Smiling cruelly, Case whispered softly, with a mocking caress. Would you like to see how Big Brother died? The elder vamp then drew away, and Sam prepared himself for another set of fangs. But what happened next, he had never expected. The vamp crashed his lips upon Sam's, and Sam's eyes went white with horror. The elder vampire crashed his lips upon Sam's, and Sam's eyes went white with horror. At once Sam tried to close his mouth, but Case dug his fingers in, forcing Sam to open. Sam groaned with pain into the kiss as the nails bit painfully into his face, drawing blood. Sam whimpered against Case's grip as he felt the elder vampire explore his mouth with force. He felt Case's tongue brush against the roof of his mouth, and Sam forced down the feeling of wanting to throw up. Sam was terrified of where this was going. Being a tall and honestly intimidating man, he had never dealt with something like this before. The experience was new and terrifying, and reminiscent of years in the cage he had tried so hard to forget. Sam felt the vampire's cold, demanding lips pressing forcefully on his own, and tried to push back. Suddenly Sam felt a painful push against his mind, forgetting the kiss as he felt the elder vampire once again penetrating his mind. Sam could only struggle uselessly. This time the onslaught was more forceful as Sam was hit by a wave of lust and pleasure radiating from his captive. Sam tried to fight back. With every ounce of strength he could muster he tried to push chaos out of his mind, and suddenly something flashed in front of his eyes. Opening his eyes he stared into the penetrating gaze of the vampire. He seemed to be drowning in the red gleaming eyes of the elder vampire. All he could see was a pair of eyes burning holes into his own. Sam pushed back again, satisfied as he felt the vampire's fury in his own mind. He ignored the blinding pain in his head from fighting the vampire's presence, but Sam felt something strange. He seemed to be falling in an abyss of darkness. Suddenly he was standing in an endless forest of perpetual gloom and overcast skies. Somehow he could feel the elder vampire still trying to get in, and he kept fighting. Ignoring his surroundings he fought to break out. Somehow he was aware that this was one of Case's memories, but he kept his focus on putting barriers and walls in his mind. The memory flickered in front of his eyes, but suddenly Sam saw him. He saw Dean standing bloody and dirty, but most important of all, alive. Sam stopped struggling at once and diverted all his attention to staying in the memory. He felt the elder vampire penetrating deeper into his mind than he had ever done before, but Sam didn't care. He let the memory overwhelm him. Somewhere he felt the vampire's kiss soften over his own lips, and it became more sensual. Sam didn't care though. Every ounce of his being was focused on Dean and the memory. The memory changed and any remnants of the world left, and Sam couldn't feel the elder vampire's attack on him anymore. Sam frowned as he realized that he was seeing the memory from the perspective of Benny, and could feel and hear everything as the vampire did. He watched from the shadows as Dean easily decapitated a vampire with a ponytail. There was a sickening swishing sound followed by a dull thud as the vamp's body fell limply to the ground. Dean seemed just as devoid of emotion as the place around him. His face was covered in blood, and there was a look of cold rage in his eyes. His was wearing the same clothes that he had when he had killed Dick, and his clothing was soiled with dirt and blood. Before Dean could even draw his blade, a vampire came out of nowhere and knocked Dean from his feet, causing his blade to go flying from his hand. Benny didn't move, still watching and waiting for the right moment. Dean tried to reach for his fallen weapon, but the vamp was on top of him trying to feed on him like a rabid, sick dog. Just when the vamp was about to bite Dean, Benny ran out of the shadows and intervened, ending up beheading one of his own kind. He got up and found Dean looking at him with narrowed eyes. They started circling around each other like a pair of predators fighting for their territory. Benny felt his fangs retracting before talking in his slick honey-coated voice. "What? No thanks for saving your hide. Yeah, I wouldn't shove this up your ass," Dean said while raising his blade. Somewhere Sam's heart was beating frantically in his chest on hearing his brother's voice for the first time in months, and he returned to the memory. "I got something you need," Benny said in a cold tone, both still circling each other. "Yeah, and what's that?" Dean's gruff voice replied. "Way out." The memory flashed in front of his eyes as his head burst in pain, but he wanted to see, he wanted to see his brother again. So he gave himself up completely to the elder vampire, mind relinquishing its control. Somewhere he was vaguely aware of the elder vampire chuckling in his head in satisfaction. He could feel his lips being licked and caressed, but he didn't care anymore. He wanted to go back to the memory, and so he did, and happiness enveloped him. He wasn't sure if it was from him on seeing Dean alive or from the elder vampire. Sam found that he didn't care as he once more willed his pain mind to focus on the memory. "You're either in or you're out," Benny said to Dean, who seemed incredulous. "So you just want to guide me out of purgatory out of the goodness of your undead heart?" Dean said mockingly. "What's in it for you?" "I'm hopping a ride," Benny answered in his honey-coated voice. "What?" Dean asked, confused. "It's a human portal, jackass. Only humans can pass through. I show you the door, you hum my soul to the other side. How do I know this IT is set up? How do I know that I'm not gonna end like your friend over there?" Dean said, motioning to the vampire that Benny had killed. "He was my friend, but now you are," Benny answered. After some deliberation, Dean nodded. "Alright, but first we find the angel, and then we hitch a ride out of here, and one wrong move, I will make sure you end up like your friend." "Fair enough," Benny nodded. Sam felt himself being pulled out of the memory, and he was aware of the elder vampire drawing away from his mind also. Sam came back to the present, and he felt the familiar sensation of the vampire's departure, as if a bond had been broken. Sam felt all his energy and strength drain out of him. He went limp against the elder vampire's hold. He would have slumped against the wall, but Caius pulled Sam towards himself, so that Sam was leaning entirely on Caius, with his chin resting on the elder vampire's shoulder. He was panting and gasping for breath. He didn't know for how long he had been in a lip lock with the elder vampire, and he felt ashamed and disgusted with himself. Sam shuddered as he felt his swollen lips. His head was splitting with pain, and Sam fought to stay awake. Despite what Caius had done to him, Sam felt happy. He felt happy that Dean was alive, and Dean was getting out of that horrible place. The joy manifested itself in tears of happiness that rolled down his face and dripped from his chin onto the elder vampire's jacket. He felt Caius slide one arm around his waist, and the elder vampire started stroking the back of Sam's head with his other hand. "SHH, it's alright Samuel, you can cry," Caius crooned in Sam's ear. Sam felt disgusted at being petted like a dog. He tried to pull away, but ended up clutching at Caius's collar for support when his body couldn't support him. "You told me he was dead, why did you do that?" Sam huffed out. Caius stopped stroking him and drew him away against the wall. He then leaned in close and whispered into Sam's ear, sending chills down Sam's spine. The sensation felt more than familiar now but was no less disturbing. Because Samuel, sadness and grief are the keys to true happiness. Sam looked wearily back into the vampire's eyes, confused. "What the hell are you talking about?" The vampire pulled him back again and resumed his petting. Stop doing that," Sam said weakly. He felt pathetic because of how incapacitated he was, and he tried to struggle against the vampire's hold. "Samuel, I wanted to relish on your happiness. I wanted to feed on your felicity," Caius said, ignoring Sam's pleas as he continued to run his fingers through Sam's hair. "And Samuel, when you gave yourself up to me." The vampire's eyes rolled in pleasure as he recalled the moment. "Oh, what an exquisite feeling. I will be trying that again." Caius looked at Sam with a lustful air. "No?" Sam panted, but his weak struggles were futile. He couldn't take the blinding pain in his head anymore. He knew that sooner or later he would drift into unconsciousness. Fear of what the vampire would do to him kept him from passing out at the moment. "Samuel, the happiness and relief that I felt from you when you first looked at your brother's face, that was what I was craving. It is what I have been desiring since the first time I entered your mind. Our deal was until my brother gets back. Sam rasped in a weak voice. He was still clutching the vampire's collar trying to pull away. The vampire paused in his gentle ministrations to Sam's head to look down at Sam. Yes, that is correct, Samuel, and I do intend to keep my word. However, that does not mean that I cannot have you after you and your brother have reunited. Sam's heart thudded loudly in his chest. He hadn't thought that far, not even once. The thought of this freaky vampire near Dean scared him more than he was scared for himself. Sam groaned as the pain became unbearable, and he scrunched his eyes. He felt chaos stiffen, and in an instant Sam felt the soft bed underneath him. The contact broken altogether, Sam felt his body relax, and any energy he had left seeped out of him. Eyes slipping shut, he felt his body shutting down. He was vaguely aware of the elder vampire whispering something in his ear as the world glided away from him. Mayu, listen to me. If you get me out of here, I'll help you, I'll protect you and keep Kiss away from you. Sam said desperately. He began to move back and turned around the corner. If only they would keep circling around each other, then Sam could get to the door. You can't even protect yourself. How will you help me? Maya asked. She kept licking her cracked lips like a person dying from thirst, stranded in the middle of the Sahara. Besides, Master Chaos cannot be stopped by the likes of you. If you want something, he gets it. Sam gulped. He knew that in his weakened state, he would not be able to defend himself. On top of that, even if he did make it to the door, he had no idea how to get out of this place. What if he ran into more vampires? Suddenly Maya clutched her abdomen and bowed down. She broke into a fit of painful coughs, spitting more blood onto the floor. Now or never, Sam thought. He suddenly ran towards Maya and struck the heavy lamp on her bowed head as hard as he could. He heard a sickeningly loud cracking sound, and Maya dropped to the floor. Sam let go of the lamp, no longer being able to carry the heavy thing. Without sparing her a second glance, Sam staggered towards the door. His legs felt as if they were made of lead, and it was becoming more and more difficult to walk with each step. After what felt like eternity, Sam made it to the door and clutched the frame as he waited for the dizziness to pass. Suddenly he felt a hand grab his ankle, pull him backwards. He narrowly avoided his head hitting the floor by putting out his hands to catch himself. Without looking, he kicked with his other leg and heard Maya scream out. He slowly stood back up. Maya was sitting with her hand on her head. Her whole face was covered in blood that was oozing out from the gash on her head. Sam closed his eyes as his world began to spin, and when he opened them, Maya was right in front of him. Her face was twisted with pain and rage under all the blood. He gasped and tried to punch her in the face, but she easily caught his hand and suddenly apped his wrist effortlessly. Sam screamed as he felt the bone break. His vision blacked out for a second, and the next thing he knew, Maya had dug her fangs into his neck. The bite was sudden, vicious and agonizing. Sam couldn't help the gasp of pain that escaped his lips. Reflexively, he used his uninjured hand and pulled Maya's blood-matted hair forcefully, trying to get her to release him. At the same time, he kneed her in the stomach. Maya was weakened and not as resilient as Kiss. She staggered back and a tremble passed through Sam's body when her fangs pulled out with a sickening pop. Adrenaline gave Sam strength to aim a left hook at Maya, which met its mark. But she seemed to be locked in a trance. She didn't try to block Sam's attack, and turned her face to look at him. Sam noticed that her eyes were no longer bloodshot, but a clear blue. The black veins that had been spidering below her skin were no longer visible, and it appeared as if she had regained her health in a matter of seconds. She lifted her hands and stared at them as if she was holding handfuls of gold. I feel so incredible, she whispered in her thin voice. I can feel the power flowing through my veins. She raised her head and looked at Sam with white eyes full of lust. Maya smacked her lips and advanced towards Sam. Sam had already thought about his move. He dropped to the floor and using his leg, he pushed Maya's legs out from under her. She momentarily lost her balance but quickly regained it. Sam, on the other hand, had reached his limit. He couldn't even stand up, and his limbs were refusing to obey his command. With a frustrated scream, Maya kicked him in the chest with inhuman strength. Sam cried out as he felt some of his ribs crack. He collapsed on his side, but Maya did not stop. She kept on kicking him. Sam curled in on himself trying to protect his already bruised chest, but the blows kept on coming. Finally she stopped and kneeled beside him on the floor. Sam was surprised that he was still conscious. With every breath that he took, blinding hot pain flared through his chest. The pain in his broken wrist was a dull throb compared to the hellfire in his chest. He felt Maya tilting him so that instead of being on his side, he was laying on his back. His new position made breathing more difficult and painful. Soon he was panting and gasping for breath. He groaned as Maya climbed on him, straddling his thighs. She leaned and licked at the blood that was flowing from the wound on Sam's neck. Now I know why you're so special, Sam, she said as she pulled away and looked at him with lustful eyes. The last time I couldn't enjoy feeding on you because I didn't want to drink. I hated being a vampire. I didn't want to hurt people. Sam chuckled hoarsely before saying sarcastically, I can see that. You're clearly not hurting me. She backhanded him and that earned him a split lip. He tried to wiggle out from underneath her weak body, barely able to squirm, let alone budge her. He couldn't believe that he was being pinned by a mere girl. Dean would have laughed at him. But this was no mere girl. She seemed to have gotten stronger after tasting his blood. Your blood changed me. It showed me my true nature. She ripped open his plaid shirt and suddenly dug her fangs into his side. Sam cried out in shock, and pain ripped through him that was like fire and acid together. He once again grabbed her black locks and tried to pull her head, but he only ended up aggravating her more. She began to scratch his body, drawing blood as she raked her blunt nails down him. Sam moaned in pain and raised his head from the floor to see 4 parallel bloody scratches running from his chest to his abdomen. He was seeing black specks in his vision, and no matter how much he blinked they wouldn't go away. Sam let go of her hair, and his hand fell limply to the floor, too weak to continue fighting. She drew away from his side to look at him. Sam was taking deep breaths, the blood loss making him lightheaded. Sam felt nauseous when he saw his blood clinging to her lips. She licked her lips slowly, face twisting in lustful pleasure. Looking at him, Maya smiled, showing off her long pointed fangs gleaming with slick red blood. I have never felt so overwhelmed, so good. I want more, she said, and Sam closed his eyes. He couldn't look at her anymore, couldn't have her face be the last thing he saw before he died. He felt a hand lightly slapping his face. Sammy, open your eyes, Maya said in a shrill thin voice that sing-songed the words, mockingly using his nickname. He ignored her, but his eyes did fly open as she scratched his bruised chest again. He wearily looked at her and she nodded while smiling happily. She licked her bloody fingernails. That's better, she said before biting just below his collarbone. Sam gave out a weak cry, and slowly his struggles became weaker and weaker. She was drawing out blood at a rapid rate. Sam could feel it as the blood was sucked out of him along with his life. Slowly feeling left his body, he felt attached as if he was no longer connected to his surroundings. He was vaguely aware when Maya pulled her fangs out of him only to bite him somewhere else. He didn't even feel the pain this time. His body was going numb and he drifted away. He felt as if he was being enveloped under several layers of fuzziness, mind and body detaching from what was happening. NNSNS. The elder vampire knew that something was wrong when he picked up a strong scent of Samuel's blood. He immediately sensed the strong emotions of fear and anger wafting from the scent. As he quickly made his way to Samuel's room, he sent one of the vampires to fetch Sullen, sensing that something bad had happened to his guest and pet. He reached the door and growled in anger and rage when he saw Maya clinging to Samuel's neck. How dare she lay her hands on what was his? In an instant he had grabbed her and flung her across the room. Before she could even stand, he plunged his hand into her chest. Her ribcage broke like a twig, and he had pulled out her heart. He turned to Samuel, not even pausing to watch her lifeless body fall to the floor. The elder vampire had carried Samuel to the bed, stepping over Tesla in his way. He could hear a steady pulse, and he growled in fury as he took in the sight of his prize. The young hunter was but a mere shadow of his former self. Samuel Case asked softly when he noticed that those hazel eyes were wide open. Samuel was staring into the air unblinkingly. His whole body was littered with bite marks. His wrist was clearly broken, and his chest was also bruised in shades of blue. He sensed a figure standing in the doorway. He didn't need to turn his head to see who it was. Celine, I need you to tend to him. Quickly. The brunette approached the bed, her heels softly clicking on the floor. Like always, she was dressed in shawls that covered every inch of her body. She flipped her long hair to the side and sat on the other side of the bed. She was holding a first aid kit. Case returned his attention to Samuel, who was still staring blankly with huge glazed eyes. Case grew concerned. For the first time in eons, he was actually worried for someone's well-being. What's wrong with him? He demanded. He's in shock, Celine answered calmly. She took out her hands from under the shawls to pick up a pillow, and placed it under Samuel's legs to raise them. Now aren't you glad that I was a doctor when you turned me? She said as she attached the IV needle back into Sam's arm. Just finish your task at hand and leave, Case said angrily. He was regretting killing Maya so swiftly. He should not have killed her, he should have kept her alive too, to starve her for centuries. He sighed and looked into Samuel's glazed eyes, and noticed him flinch. He was coming out of his dazed state. That's it, Samuel. Come back to me, you're safe now, the elder vampire said gently as he cupped Sam's face. His ribs are in a bad shape and his wrist is broken, Celine announced. She took out a bottle of disinfectant from the kit and began to clean Sam's wounds. Case caught her wrist before she could touch Sam. Just bandage his chest and plaster his wrist. Give him something to ease his pain and I'll clean him up myself, Case said as he released her wrist. She raised her brow superciliously for a moment before acquiescing with a nod and turning away. Case gently lifted Sam up and made him sit upright as Celine began to treat his ribs. Sam was blinking now and looking around lazily. He groaned as Case removed his bloody shirt that was still on him in shreds. After Celine had wrapped up Sam's chest and plastered his wrist, she replaced the IV bag with an O-negative blood bag. She then injected some colorless fluids into Sam's arm, who winced a little. For the pain, she said as she placed the empty syringe back into the kit. Thank you, Celine, Case said as he laid Sam back down into the bed. Sam groaned at the movement. Oh, also, take Tesla with you as you leave and close the door behind you. Caius said casually as he looked fondly into Sam's confused, dazed eyes. He heard Celine cursing under her breath as she dragged an unconscious Tesla out the door. Finally, when he heard the door close, he picked up the wet cloth and began to clean the many bite wounds and the scratches with the disinfectant that Celine had left. What's happening? Sam slurred out as his eyes darted around lazily. The elder vampire found himself smiling. It was clear that Samuel was under the influence of the drugs that had been injected into him. As soon as Sam's eyes focused in on Caius, he cried out and tried to scramble out of the bed and away from Caius. Caius quickly gripped the boy before he could cause any more damage to his injuries. Samuel, calm down, Caius said sternly. He didn't like Samuel trying to run away from him. The lack of control was frustrating and made him wonder if it would be wise to turn him. Leave me alone, Sam said as he tried to kick the elder vampire. It did not even try to block the feeble attack. Samuel, if you don't calm down and let me treat you, I promise I will turn you right now, Caius said sternly, bringing his face close to the cowering man. As soon as Sam registered those words, he froze, his face a mask of fear and horror. That's better, Caius said as he began dabbing at the bite mark on Sam's shoulder almost lovingly. It was using all his willpower to keep himself from drinking the sweet ambrosia that was Sam's blood himself. Even the mere scent was overwhelming. The fear and emotions that enveloped the scent were intoxicating. He felt saliva coat his tongue as he inhaled the delicious scent. Once again he felt anger flare up in his chest at Maya. She was responsible for Samuel's weakened state and for him not being able to feed. He looked at the long parallel scratches on Sam's body and gritted his teeth. Your hair's like Wolverine's, Sam suddenly huffed out, letting out a small giggle. The sound pulled the elder vampire from his thoughts. Confused at that statement, Caius looked at Sam's face to see him looking as dazed and loopy as ever. His eyelids were half closed. The drugs had fully kicked in. When will Dean come back? He asked in a childish manner that made the elder vampire grin. It seemed that the drug had quite a pleasant effect on Samuel, taking away the barriers and leaving behind a child. Soon, I will make sure you see your brother again. I know how much you love Dean, Caius said gently as he placed a band-aid on the cleaned wound. Samuel nodded and smiled a little, the upturned lips making the pit of Caius's stomach quiver with happiness. Samuel seemed to be lost in thought, and his smile widened a little. The elder vampire found himself itching with curiosity to find what thought made the young hunter so happy. Perhaps he could try to enter Samuel's mind again. He knew that Samuel always resisted his entry, and that the resistance always used up all his strength, making Samuel weak. Right now Samuel was extremely vulnerable, and Caius didn't want to risk Sam. However, the drugs were clearly having an effect that the elder vampire had never anticipated, one which loosened Sam's barriers. Could he risk it? What if Samuel tried to resist him and in his weakened state lost his sanity? Or worse, his life? Sam giggled a little, still lost in thought. The elder vampire frowned when he noticed the wound on Sam's neck had started bleeding again. He picked up the cloth to clean it, but immediately placed it back down. Placing one hand lightly on Sam's chest, he leaned down and slowly licked the bleeding wound, careful not to draw blood. At once the intoxicating flavor enveloped him. The blood seemed to melt on his tongue, and he felt shivers of pleasure tingle up his spine. He felt Samuel tense a little underneath him. He felt the bond form between them, and Sam squirmed under the elder vampire's grip. Hey, get off, Sam said lazily. Caius felt Sam's hand patting his shoulder lightly, but Caius could not detect fear, only confusion in Sam's emotion. He continued to lick Samuel's tender skin, and almost reflexively he began to enter Sam's mind. For the first time he found Samuel completely defenseless. There were no barriers blocking his mind. Samuel's memories were like an open book. Slowly he let himself drown in Samuel's thoughts. He knew that as long as Samuel was not fighting the mind meld, it would not drastically affect him. It may weaken Sam a little more though. He slowly sieved through Sam's mind and found Samuel thinking about a memory. Feelings of warmth and happiness flooded through him. He found his dead heart beating again. He saw a kitchen. Sunlight was streaming through the windows, bathing the old kitchen in light. A frying pan was smoking on the stove, and a burning smell lingered in the air. In the center of the kitchen was a round table. He noticed a 5-year-old Samuel sitting on a chair with his elbows on the table. He was clad in pajamas and a soft t-shirt. His short legs were hanging above the floor, and he was swinging them back and forth. He blew his bangs out of his eyes and huffed out a long frustrated sigh. Dean, he shouted. Your eggs are burning. I'm coming, I'm coming. A voice came from the living room, and a boy with short brown hair, also dressed in pajamas, came running into the kitchen. Damn it. He cursed and quickly turned off the stove. Why didn't you turn off the stove, Sammy? Dean asked angrily as he scraped off the eggs onto a plate. Sam shrugged and made a face when Dean placed the burnt eggs in front of him. Dean took the slice of bread out of the toaster that was now cold and placed it on the plate. I'm not eating that, Sam said, shaking his head and pushing the plate away. Dean rolled his eyes and pushed the plate back. Come on, Sammy. That was the last egg and it's not that burnt. Sam shook his head as he poked the egg with a fork. He stuck out his tongue. Ugh, it's gross. No Sammy, it's yummy. Dean said as he took a bite and smiled. See? Yum. Sam frowned and crossed his arms in front of his chest. He patted at Dean. Dean sighed as he picked up the fork and held it at Sam's mouth, who turned his head away. Sammy, don't be like that. Sam shook his head again. Okay, if you finish this egg I'll give you the prize that I found in the cereal box. Remember, it was my turn to check and I found the prize. Sam narrowed his eyes and stuck his finger on his chin. He slowly nodded and opened his mouth. Dean stuck the fork into his mouth, and Sam ate the egg. It is a little yum. Sam said with his mouth full. Dean grinned at him. Told you so. See, Big Brother's always right. Dean said as he poked a thumb in his puffed-out chest. When's Dad coming back? Sam asked as he ate his last bite. Tomorrow maybe. Maybe? Sam asked, cocking his head to the side. His soft brown curls lightly danced on his head, sunlight reflecting off of them at the movement. That's what you said last time and Dad didn't come for a week. I don't know, Sam, okay. I only know what Dad tells me. Dean said angrily, and Sam immediately quieted down. He looked down at his lap where his hands were clasped. Hey Sammy. Dean said as a mischievous grin played on his lips. He raised his hands and began advancing towards Sam. Run. The tickle monster is coming to get you. Sam gave out a tiny scream and slid off the chair with a giggle. Dean quickly picked him up and pinned him to the floor. He then began to tickle Sam on the stomach, both of them laughing all the while. Sam was kicking in the air as he squealed with an explosive eruption of pent-up laughter. The elder vampire felt disappointed as the memory ended. He had been enjoying himself. In other humans he had never seen so much depth and detail of even a single memory. He always got vague images. He found himself wanting more. Suddenly he felt pain erupt through his body. He quickly pulled himself out of Sam's mind, and at the same time he pulled away from Sam's neck. He realized with a jolt that he had actually bitten into the neck and had been drawing blood. Like a pathetic newly turned fledgling he had lost control. Samuel looked deathly pale and was unmoving. He could hear a faint irregular pulse and pinched the wound to stop the bleeding. His head was not clear, and he was feeling flustered at being in contact with Samuel for so long. At the same time he was feeling happiness, exhilaration, and intoxicating felicity. He felt another sharp pain in his back. He quickly turned to see a man standing in the room with a gun in his hand. The elder vampire had been in Sam's mind many times that he had got faint glimpses of this man. This man was Dean Winchester, and unlike the innocent boy that he had seen in Samuel's memory, this man was anything but innocent. He was intimidating with a fear look of rage in his eyes. Get the hell away from my brother, you son of a bitch. He hissed. The elder vampire couldn't help but admire that fierce protectiveness. Too bad he wouldn't be alive for long. Dean stopped the rusty pickup truck that smelled of stale beer and butterscotch toffee in front of a huge iron gate. Apparently this was the place where Sammy was being held, but Benny made it sound as if Sam was staying as a guest in a 5-star hotel. Dean hoped that was the case. He didn't want to find Sam drained of blood or worse, turned. He shuddered as his imagination painted horror shows in his mind. No, he shook his head. Sam was fine. He had to be. But deep down Dean knew that Sam was a shining beacon for trouble. The kid had gotten strangled more times than he had gotten laid. Dean had wanted to come during the day, of course, because the vampires would have been sleeping at that time, but Benny couldn't have come during the day. So here he was ambushing a nest of vampires at night. John Winchester would have punched him in the face for coming to ambush a nest of vampires at night with a vampire by his side. Dean had argued with Benny. He didn't know why he wouldn't be able to find Sammy on his own, but Benny insisted that without him Dean couldn't stand a chance. We walk from here, Benny said, getting out of the truck. Dean parked the truck and followed Benny through the narrow opening in the half-closed gate. Dean was holding a machete in one hand and a dart gun in the other. These past few days had been difficult for him, not just because Sam was missing, but because the world seemed different and foreign. It felt weird to move around without a weapon in his hand. He actually felt naked without a blood-crusted blade in his hand. Sure, the shower and to actually pee in a toilet felt good, but it just felt wrong to see people going out and about without a care in the world. So now he was actually glad that he was getting a chance to slice off some heads. After walking for some time through the path in between the dense trees, they stopped at a huge mansion. Now Dean understood why he needed Benny's help. This place was friggin' huge, and Dean didn't have the faintest idea where Sammy could be. Great. So we finally arrived at Count Dracula's castle, Dean said as he followed Benny to the side of the mansion away from the front door. I know a shortcut. I think I know where Sam's room is, Benny said as he uncovered a wooden door from under a thick curtain of twisted vines. Dean followed Benny and entered a dimly lit hallway. Dean expected to find candles and fires illuminating the mansion, but the halls were lit with bulbs and tube lights. Dean tightened his hold on the machete and slowly followed Benny through the twisted halls. Where the hell are the vamps? Dean asked quietly as he made the 20th turn. He had no idea how Benny was maneuvering his way through the labyrinth of twists and turns. They must be in the feeding grounds, the place where they keep the humans, Benny replied. They took another turn and immediately came upon a group of vampires. Dean didn't even flinch in surprise. He had enough surprises in purgatory, and now his senses were too heightened. He actually welcomed the intrusion. He had been getting impatient at the lack of sudden encounters. Him and Benny worked in perfect sync, covering each other's backs, moving around and deflecting blows. In no time they had beheaded all the 5 vamps who didn't even put up much of a fight as compared to the vicious monsters in purgatory. Just like old times, Benny said as he picked up his blood-stained machete from the floor. Dean grinned at him as he wiped his machete clean on the shirt of the fallen corpse. They started moving again. They passed many doors, and Benny checked some of them only to close them again with a disappointed shake of his head. At one turn Benny paused, lifting his chin up. Dean could tell that he was using his advanced hearing. I hear another group coming. Listen, I'll hold them off, you get Sam out. My guess is that his room is in this hallway, okay? Dean nodded and got ready for another assault. And brother, Benny said in a grave voice, if you meet the elder vamp, keep your distance. I'm not sure if those darts will even work. If he goes down even for a second, you do not give him a second glance. You do not try to behead him. Just grab your brother and run. Dean rolled his eyes at his friend. Benny was saying this to him for the 100th time that day, and Dean had gotten the message loud and clear. The elder vamp was not to be taken lightly. Dean nodded. Don't worry. First priority is getting Sammy out. I can always kill the bastard later with Sam by my side. He felt excitement rise in his chest. He was gonna see Sam. After almost a year, he was gonna see his little brother. Benny motioned at him, telling him to get ready. Sure enough, they came across about half a dozen vampires. Dean managed to behead 2 of them when suddenly his machete was knocked out of his hands by a rather large and cocky vampire. Dean was gonna shoot him when Benny sliced its head. Go, Dean. Benny yelled at him. Dean nodded and sped off down the hall. He kicked open a door and found a bedroom empty. He cursed loudly and started running again. Why did this place have to be so big? He hoped that Sam would be wearing boots so that he could just grab him and make a run, meet Benny and get out. There. Simple as that, but he knew that Winchester luck was rotten, and simple was a word that did not exist in their lives. But couldn't there be an exception? An anomaly? Just this once. Dean's heart was leaping wildly in his chest. He opened another door hoping to find Sam with his nose buried in a book. Instead he saw a man leaning on a bed and feeding on someone. Dean hoped it was Sam, but Dean couldn't see the person on the bed, since the vamp was almost lying on top of him. Those worn denim-clad legs were long, too long. Just like Sam's. Oh God, please don't let it be Sam. Dean raised his gun with steady hands. He shot the vampire 3 times in the back. Its body jerked slightly from the blows, but otherwise it seemed unaffected. Body still posed over the body on the bed. The vampire suddenly pulled back and Dean's heart froze. What he saw made him see red. His hands were shaking so badly that he thought that he might drop the gun. Dean immediately recognized that mop of chestnut brown hair. Sammy was lying on the bed and he was just as pale as the sheets below him. Dean would have thought he was dead if it were not for the falling and rising chest, which was heavily bandaged. Sam's wrist was also plastered. There was a blood bag hanging by him with the IV stuck in his arm. The vampire was sitting beside Sam on the bed, frowning down at his brother and not acknowledging Dean. The vampire shook his head and started pinching the bleeding wound on Sam's neck. Dean clenched his jaws and shot at the vampire again in his arm. This time the vampire turned his face towards him, and Dean felt sick when he saw Sammy's blood clinging at the vampire's lips. Get the hell away from my brother, you son of a bitch, Dean said fiercely. The vampire smiled and licked his lips clean. It seemed as if the darts had no effect on him, and there was not even the slightest trace of pain on that smug face. Sammy, talk to me, you okay? Dean said loudly, but of course Sam did not reply. It took all his willpower to stand there rooted by the door, and not to dash towards Sam. Dean couldn't see his face, so he didn't know if Sam was awake or not. He was too still to be awake. Dean could feel his heart thundering loudly against his chest. He hadn't been in this much panic even in purgatory, and only the bruised and still sight of his little brother could send him into overdrive. Despite his internal reservation, Dean kept his cool facade. He growled when the vampire lifted his hand and ran it through Sam's hair almost absent-mindedly with his eyes trained on Dean. Dean Winchester, I was actually just looking at you right now in one of Samuel's memory. I suppose you killed Benny since I cannot sense him. The vampire said as he continued to cart his fingers through Sam's hair, his whole air unconcerned. He had that allure of a vampire, and his voice resonated with authority. What do you mean his memory? What the hell did you do to him? Dean asked as terror crawled up his throat. Sam had not even stirred once. What is wrong with him? The vampire's smile vanished to be replaced by an expression of anger and surprisingly concern. Yes, he is very weak, but I can assure you, I have dealt with the one responsible for his battered state. The vampire said, and he motioned to the corner of the room with his chin. Dean followed his gaze and saw a girl lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Something that looked like a piece of meat was at her heart. It was her heart was lying a few inches away. Dean returned his gaze to the vampire, who continued to stare at him with his gleaming cat-like eyes. Those eyes reminded Dean of the eyes he had seen in every dark hole in purgatory. Eyes that haunted him and followed him everywhere he went in purgatory. Eyes that he thought he had left behind. Unpleasant memories began to surface and he growled at the vampire. "Stop touching him." Dean shouted and fired another dart. This one however stuck to the wall just behind Vampire's head. He had dodged it, and Dean hadn't even seen him do it. Suddenly Sam moaned and at once the vampire turned his attention to Sam. Dean couldn't take it anymore. He sped off towards Sam, but before he had even made it halfway across the room, he was flung from his feet and he collided into the cupboards behind him opposite to the bed. He felt the air leave his lungs at the impact and he stumbled to the ground. Damn, the vamp was too friggin' strong. When he regained his balance he saw the vampire sitting on the same spot cupping Sam's face. How the hell did that vampire move so fast? Dean even turned around and checked the room to see if there was someone else, but they were alone. Dean rubbed his chest and glanced at Sam. Now Dean could see Sam more clearly. His whole body was covered in bite marks and band-aids. There were long scratches on his stomach disappearing under the bandage on Sam's chest. Dean could see livid bruises standing against Sam's pale skin at the edge of the thick bandages on Sam's chest. Dean felt a sudden urge to cover Sam up with his jacket. The vampire was again stroking Sam like he was some dog. He was looking at Dean with daring eyes as if challenging him to step forward again. Luckily Dean still had the gun in his hand. He noticed that the vampire had already removed all the darts from his body. Damn it, he should be on the floor by now. Those darts were not just laced with dead man's blood. They were something else entirely. Sam moaned again, and Dean saw his eyes flutter open. Dean took a step forward. Suddenly he felt a vice-like grip on his shoulder. The vampire was standing in his face. The vampire's face was twisted in a R. How the hell was this vamp so friggin' fast? "You take one more step and I will break your legs," the vampire hissed in his face. Dean clenched his jaws, refusing to cry out in pain when the hold on his shoulder tightened. He raised his gun, and before he knew it the gun was no longer in his hands. It was lying on the floor in pieces. The vampire released his arm. He was smiling again. He shook his head in obvious disapproval. "The only reason that you're alive is because Samuel would want to meet you. Then I will kill you," the vampire said as he once again sat down on the bed beside Sam. Sam was struggling to get up now. He was mumbling something under his breath. "Sick," he huffed out. Dean looked around for a trash can. He knew that Sam was gonna puke. He didn't give a damn about his legs. All he knew was that Sammy needed a trash can, and Dean was gonna find him one. Dean felt a swoosh of air around him, and he frowned when he saw that the vampire had made Sam sit upright with one arm behind his back. A trash can was in Sam's lap. Sam heaved into the can but nothing much came out, only yellow bile. "Sammy!" Dean shouted and he risked a step forward, but Sam was busy retching his guts out, and he didn't look at Dean. The vampire raised his eyebrow at Dean, and with his free hand, he squeezed Sam's plastered wrist. Sam immediately cried out and pulled his wrist back, and at the same time Dean took a step back, getting the message. The vampire knew exactly how to keep him at bay. Sam pushed the can away weakly and slumped back into the vampire who was sitting behind Sam to support him. The vampire placed the trash can by the bed near Sam's bloody shredded shirt. Dean didn't let his gaze linger on the shirt for long. "Samuel, how are you feeling?" the vampire asked in a gentle voice. Sam was leaning entirely on the vampire. His eyes were hidden behind his fringe of hair, and his head was bowed down. He was panting heavily. Dean bit his lip as full-blown panic enveloped him. He had never expected to find Sam in such a weakened state. Sam was barely aware of what was going on around him. "Awful," he answered, singing the word. Dean frowned. Okay, something fishy was going on. He could tell just by listening to Sam's voice that either he was drugged or he had a concussion. "Sammy," he said, and suddenly Sam's head, which had been resting on his chest, shot upwards. His glazed, dilated eyes searched the room and finally met Dean's gaze. Now Dean was sure that Sam was drugged. His eyes were too big and he was smiling a little. Sam chuckled and his plastered hand shot towards Dean, as if he was trying to reach him and hold him. He was smiling. "Dean," he said, "you back?" Dean grinned at him. "Yes, Sammy. I'm here to get your ass out of this place, and then after you get better I'm gonna give you a serious beatdown on your choice of friends." Sam was just looking at him goofily. Dean was sure that he didn't understand a single word Dean had just said. "You burned the eggs," Sam said excitedly. His words were slurred, and he was panting heavily as if he was having trouble breathing. Dean frowned at him. He was too loopy, but the vampire also seemed to have gotten more excited at Sam's words. He had his arm behind Sam's back, but Sam seemed to have eyes only for Dean. "He did, but it was yum," the vampire said slowly in Sam's ear, who nodded. "It was yum? Why did that sound just too familiar?" "Oh right, because that was the only way that Sam used to eat his food. Dean used to taste it first and confirmed it that it was yum, and then Sam would eat it. But how the hell did that friggin' vamp know that? It's not like Sam would have a heart-to-heart with the vamp." Then suddenly the realization hit Dean like a freight train. What had the vampire said when he had first seen Dean? Something about looking in Sam's mind, his memory. Dean's mind was working in overdrive. His hands were shaking. This vamp had done some kind of mind rape on Sammy. God. He needed to get Sam out. He felt like puking when he realized that the vampire had been invading Sam's memories somehow. How else could the vamp know? How else could he know about Dean's secret way of making Sammy eat his food? Dean? Dean was pulled out of his thoughts by Sam's shaky voice. Sam was trying to reach him. He had both his arms extended towards Dean. Suddenly Dean was reminded of the little toothy, dimpled Sam who used to extended his arms to Dean to hoist him up. He remembered that whenever Dad and him would call Sam, Sam always wobbled up to Dean and raised his little arms urging Dean to pick him up. He never went to Dad, always Dean. Dean couldn't take it anymore. Sam was calling for him. Slowly he began to move towards Sam, who laughed goofily at Dean's advancement. But Dean stopped when he saw the vampire grip Sam's bicep. I told you to stay back, the vampire said icily, and Dean froze. In an instant the vampire effortlessly turned Sam around, so that instead of facing towards Dean, Sam was sitting on the bed facing the wall on the right side of the bed. He was now face to face with the vampire, who was sitting with one leg folded under him. Sam kept his gaze locked at Dean, even when his face was turned, but finally he looked at the vampire. The vampire was still holding Sam so that he couldn't slump sideways. Sam was just too weak and it broke Dean's heart. Let him go. Dean shouted, but he didn't step forward. The vampire smiled at Sam. No, Dean. Sam said fearfully, and Dean's heart sank. He didn't know what to do. He was scared that if he approached them the vamp might hurt Sam. I have never been this mesmerized by a human before, the vampire said softly as he stroked Sam's cheek with his thumb. Dean didn't know what to do. He was feeling sick at watching the vampire caress Sam. He had no idea what Sam had been through, and he was terrified to even think about it. Please, let him go. Take me instead, but let Sam go. Dean pleaded, but the vampire didn't even look at him. He continued to stroke Sam's face. Sam was looking fearfully at the vampire, his eyes wide with terror. More than once Sam tried to turn his face towards Dean, but the vampire clutched his chin, forcing him to meet his gaze. I want to turn him. The thought of having him as my mate is just too tempting. Dean felt his knees shake. His throat felt like sandpaper, and blood was thundering against his eardrums. No, his voice broke in desperation. Don't. The vampire had his face now inches away from Sam. Sam was frozen in his place. His eyes wide and unblinking. The fear radiating from him was contagious. Get away, Sam said in a broken whisper. Even though Sam was a grown man, right now Dean could only see his little brother. His baby brother in the clutches of a depraved monster. How someone so big could look so small and helpless was beyond Dean's understanding. Hey, listen to me, Dean shouted. He even flailed his arms in the air. He had to get the vampire's attention away from Sam. Hey, freak, I didn't kill Benny. Turns out he hates you as much as I hate you. He wants to end your undead ass just like me. He felt a storm of rage and anger in his chest, pushing away the helplessness. Thankfully the vampire turned his face away from Sam to look at Dean with an unaffected expression. Dean saw Sam sigh and sag a little in relief. I do not care the slightest whether Benny is alive or not, the vampire said as he returned his gaze towards Sam. The only thing that I care about is this, right here in front of me. The vampire spoke softly, yet his voice sent a chill down Dean's spine. The vampire's face was so too close to Sam's now. Sam turned his face away, eyes turning towards Dean, unseeing as they were glazed over in fear and pain. The vampire kissed Sam's neck sensuously. Dean felt as if his whole world were imploding as he considered the implications of that action. A single tear slid down Sam's face. Dean couldn't take it anymore. He felt something up inside him. He broke into a mad dash and reached the bed, but before he could so much as touch Sam, he felt a sudden yet painful slap to his chest. He stumbled back and saw the vampire suddenly appear in front of his face. This time the vampire raised his fist. Dean turned his face just in time to avoid his nose being broken. His hand, however, was not fast enough to counter the fist that felt a brick to his face. His head collided with the wall behind him, and he was vaguely aware of falling to the ground. Dean groaned as he opened his eyes. His head was throbbing like a Sanuvovich, and what the hell was he doing on the floor? He quickly sat up and looked around. He was on a floor, and not lying in the mud in the middle of the dark forests of purgatory at night. Dean shuddered in relief. He had gotten out. He lifted his hand and felt the back of his head. He jerked when his fingers brushed against a big bump on his skull. Well, that explained the throbbing and the confusion. He looked around at the room. Definitely not a standard crappy motel room, and then it all came back to him. Sammy, he yelled, and after swinging a little on his feet he stumbled up to the bed, relieved to see Sam alone without Count Dracula. He was sleeping, a pained expression frozen on his face. He quickly assessed Sam. He was wearing a clean gray t-shirt now, and a wound on his neck where the vampire had been feeding from was bandaged. Sam's face was too thin, and his cheekbones were protruded. There were dark bags under his eyes. The blood bag had been replaced by an IV bag which was half empty. The thought of the elder vampire being in the room with a drugged-up, vulnerable Sam while Dean had been knocked unconscious scared the crap out of him. Especially as he recalled the vampire violating his brother in such an intimate way. He had to get Sam out. He jumped when his phone suddenly buzzed. It was Benny. Dean answered it. "Tell me you're alive." Dean said and let out the breath he'd been holding when he heard Benny on the other end. He sounded winded and in pain, but what else was new? "Yeah, sorry brother. I had to make a run for it. Case came after me. I knew I didn't stand a chance against him, but the mere fact that I was able to escape means that the darts worked. I don't know if they worked or not. I shot 4 of them into him." "You found your brother?" "Yeah," Dean said as he took hold of Sam's good wrist. He hated the fact that his finger and thumb could easily circle Sam's wrist and still leave room to spare. "He's not in a good shape. He's too weak. We have to wait for the vamp to leave and then bust Sam out because he's a friggin' Hercules. Knocked me out with just 1 blow. In fact, I don't know why he didn't kill me." Then he chuckled on the other end. "Now you know how that feels since you've been always on the giving end. I don't think the Case leaves, he usually stays in his mansion. I can get you out because Case may decide to finish you off. I'm sure that we'll be able to fight our way out just like we came in. I'm not gonna die that easily. Besides, I'm not gonna leave without Sam. We wait until Sam can walk on his own." "You call, Chief," Benny said, but he sounded like he believed that it was a good decision. "Look, if the vamp wanted me dead, he would have done it by now. Trust me, he had plenty of chances." Benny grunted in agreement. "Let's hope that the darts work. Maybe they need time to kick in. Sometimes the effect is delayed when a vampire has recently fed," Benny said. Dean had a sudden image of the vampire clinging to Sam's throat when he had first opened the door. He felt the urge to vomit. "Yeah, he had been feeding on Sam," Dean said in a wavering voice. He looked at Sam, who was twitching and scrunching his eyes. Clear signs of his waking up. Dean hoped that the drugs had worn off. "Benny, I gotta go, I'll call," Dean said as he swiped the screen. He had bought a new phone after coming back from purgatory, and he still couldn't get the hang of it. Dean fished through his pockets and his waistband. He realized that all his lockpicks and knife cutters were missing. He checked his ankle where he had a small sheath knife strapped, but also found it missing. Then why did he have his phone? Dean was pulled out of his thoughts when Sam groaned and raised his bandaged wrist to his face. Dean sat down on the huge bed beside Sam. "Hey Sammy, is it you or the loopy you?" Dean asked as he gently shook Sam by the shoulder. As soon as Dean touched him, Sam leaped out of the bed and yelped when the needle tore his skin. He backpedaled till his back hit the opposite wall. His eyes were wide open. "Maya?" He huffed out and clutched his chest. Dean quickly stood up, raising his arms in a placating manner. "Easy Sammy, the chick's dead," Dean said as he looked at the corner of the room and noticed that the body and the blood was gone. "You're bleeding," Dean said as he looked at Sam's arm, but Sam was looking at Dean with wild, crazy eyes. "Dean?" Sam asked as he slowly stepped forward. "No," Dean said while cocking his head and grinning. "I'm Batman, remember?" Sam immediately smiled, his eyes glittering with pure joy and relief. "You got it." "Yes, Sammy. You got me," Dean said, but his sentence was cut off as Sam quickly circled around the bed and hugged him. A bone-crushing hug. Dean hugged him back. Not too tightly since Sam was so bruised and fragile, and Dean could feel Sam's hot puffs of breath on his neck, indicating that the kid probably had a fever. Dean smiled as he felt Sam bury his face in Dean's shoulder. Yup, they had a long overdue chick flick. Sam pulled back to look at him. "You look like crap," Sam said as he grinned toothily. Dean remembered that he was still covered in scars and bruises from purgatory. He raised his eyebrows at Sam. "I look like crap." He shook his head in disbelief. "I'm not the one covered in hickeys." Sam's smile immediately disappeared, and he touched his bandaged neck. He swayed a little. "Whoa, easy," Dean said as he took Sam by his bicep and settled him on the edge of the bed. Sam examined his plastered wrist and sighed. "Dean, what are you doing here?" he said wearily. Dean sat down on the bed beside him and looked at him incredulously. "What the hell are you talking about? I'm here to bust your ass out." "Seriously Sam, this is one of the stupidest things you've ever done. Given yourself up to the vamp," Dean said sternly. Sam looked at him with raised eyebrows. "At least I didn't sell my soul. And besides, it worked, you got out," he said while smiling. Dean dragged his hand on his face. "Sammy, we promised each other that we wouldn't look for each other if anything happened." Sam scoffed. "Dean, we both know that you would have done the same thing if you were in my shoes." Dean sighed. He didn't want to argue right now, and Sam was right. He would have done anything and everything to save Sam if their roles were reversed. "How did you find me?" Sam asked. "Then he told me." "Damn it, I told him not to tell you. I knew you were gonna act this way," Sam said, exasperated. Dean rolled his eyes. "Shut up, Sam. Let's just get you out of here before Dark Flash shows up again." Sam's head suddenly shot in Dean's direction. "You've seen him. Was he here?" Dean nodded. "Let's just say that I found you at the right moment." Sam placed his head in his palms and huffed out a long miserable sigh. "So you killed Maya?" "Yeah, you really did come at the right time. I thought that she was gonna kill me." Dean nodded his eyebrows. "I didn't kill her. The crazy vamp did." Sam raised his head and looked at Dean with a confused expression which then turned to terror. He suddenly stood up and backed away. Sam, what's wrong? Dean asked worriedly. He hadn't seen Sam this scared since Lucifer had been riding shotgun in his head. Sam's voice broke. He did it to me again, didn't he? Sam was trembling. His expression one of sheer terror. Dean stood up. Sammy, it's okay, No, Dean. I was drugged, what I? Sam asked with a wavering voice, and he could read the answer from Dean's face. He raised his good hand and clutched his hair. I remember a little. I couldn't push him out of my mind. Sam sobbed a little. Dean frowned and gritted his teeth. He was gonna make that bastard pay for scaring Sammy like that, but first things first. Dean knew what Sam was talking about. He had pieced it together before. Dean took Sam by the shoulders, and Sam looked at him with fear and desperation. Listen to me, Sam. I'm gonna get you out and then I'm gonna slice off that bastard's head. You got it. Sam shrugged Dean off and turned around, facing towards the cupboards. You don't understand, Dean. I don't know what he did to me. What if he made me forget things? Dean sighed. Sam, then I'll help you remember. Let's just worry about getting out first. Okay. Sam looked at the ceiling. Dean could tell that he was trying to keep himself from crying. He turned around and nodded. He sat on the bed again. This time slumping against the headboard, suddenly looking bone-tired and exhausted. The excitement from seeing Dean was probably wearing off. Dean paced the room. Sam could walk, so that was a plus. He strolled to the door and cursed loudly when he saw that there were no locks on the inside, which meant that the only way they could get out was by either busting the door or being let out. Dean crossed his fingers and turned the handle. Of course it was locked, and he was sure that he wouldn't be able to open the door by slamming his shoulder into it or kicking it. Even if he tried, the mansion was filled with vampires with advanced hearing who would probably come running to greet him. Dean kicked the door in frustration. He began pacing the room again. Does this guy even bleed? Dean asked Sam, who was looking at him wearily. I don't know, Dean. Tesla said that he can't be killed. Yeah, I've heard. Dean had no idea who Tesla was and he didn't care. All he cared was getting Sammy out and then killing that stupid elder vamp. Was there a sun in purgatory? Sam suddenly asked. Dean stopped his pacing and frowned at Sam. I mean, I saw the dark forest and all. Just wondering, was there a sun? Dean nodded. Yeah, there was one, but it was weird. You know, like it couldn't shine or something. Dean looked around and realized that there were no windows. He suddenly felt a pang in his stomach. He knew how sentimental Sam could be, and he had been holed up in this room for months. He was missing the sun. Wait, did Sam say that he saw the forest? Back up. What do you mean you saw the forest? Dean asked as he came to stand at the foot of the bed. He could tell by looking at Sam's face that Sam had accidentally said that, and that he was now regretting it. Wait, Dean said as panic rose in his chest. Did you enter purgatory? Tell me you didn't. Sam laughed and shook his head. No, Dean. I meant the case shower told me. The vamp, he told me. No, he showed you. What the hell did that bastard do, Sam? Dean asked angrily. I'm sure he didn't show you a movie. What the hell did he do to you? Dean, just drop it. I don't have to worry because you're here now. All we need is a plan to get out of this place. Maybe we can work on it right now, Sam said while nodding his head. Dean caught Sam's ploy right then and there, not falling for it. Don't try to change the subject, Sam. Tell me, what did he do? How did he make you see purgatory? Sam sighed. He looked in his lap and flushed in embarrassment. The gets up close and enters my mind. I can always push him out, but I didn't that time. Sam gulped and looked at Dean with watery eyes. He told me that you were dead, Dean. I had to know, I had to see you. Sam said this as if he was trying to justify himself. He looked guilty. Great, leave it to Sam to blame himself for everything. Well, I ain't dead. I'm a Winchester. He winked at Sam, trying to lighten the mood. Did you see me? Sam nodded. I saw you through Benny's eyes. You were slicing some vamp's head with a ponytail, and then Benny saved you from another vamp. Dean frowned. He remembered that time. That was the first time he met Benny. He didn't like it that Sam had seen him when he was at his lowest. Purgatory had gotten his darkest side out of him. What else did you see? Dean asked a little sternly, and Sam immediately looked away. Nothing. He showed me that only once. Cass, Sam said suddenly. Cass can get us out, he said hopefully. Dean immediately felt a heavy grief cloud his heart. Cass, he couldn't make it. Sam nodded sadly. So, how are we getting out? Before Dean could reply, the door opened and the elder vampire came in. Sam immediately gasped and he scrambled out of the bed. Dean pulled Sam's arm and pushed him behind himself, shielding Sam from the vampire. The vampire seemed to be in a fit of rage. His eyes were narrowed and his hands closed into fists by his sides. He was glaring at Dean with a fear look. Dean was surprised that he couldn't see steam blowing out of his ears. What did you do to me? The vampire asked fiercely as he ran towards him. Dean realized that he had not seen the vampire run, not even once. He seemed weird running towards him. Dean pushed Sam further back and readied himself for a fight. This time he could see the vamp's moves clearly. Was it possible that the vampire had lost its speed? Dean shot his fist at the vampire, who caught Dean's fist in a vice-like grip. Dean cried out. Apparently the vampire still had its super strength. Dean clawed at the vampire's hand, but the vampire slowly began to twist his fist. Dean gritted his teeth and tried to twist his arm along with his hand. Let him go. Sam shouted from behind him, and the vampire released his grip. Dean immediately stood while clutching his wrist. But his relief was short-lived when the vampire clutched his throat instead. He pushed Dean so that Dean ended up with his back against the cupboards. He could feel the handle pressing painfully in his back as he gasped for breath. He clawed at the vampire's hand with both of his, but it was futile. The vampire raised him up with just one hand, so that his legs were kicking in the air. Please, let him go, Sam shouted. He came running forward and tried to pull Case off. The vampire merely pushed Sam forcefully with his free hand. Sam ended up stumbling back as he broke into a fit of violent coughs. He groaned and rubbed his bruised chest. All this time Dean could feel his trachea constricting. His struggles were getting weaker. His lungs were burning. You said that you will let us go. You promise, Sam said in between gasps of breath. Thankfully the vampire released his hold. Dean immediately ended up dropping to the ground as he took mouthfuls of precious air. The vampire clutched his jacket's collar instead and slammed him into the cupboards again. I did, and I would have freed you, Samuel, but not now. That was before your brother came and intruded the sanctity of my house. He slaughtered my kin. He shot at me with poison of which I am not aware of. He will pay dearly for his insolence. He will pay with his pathetic life. The vampire spoke with malice. Do anything you want with me, asshole, but let Sam go. He didn't chop off your vamps' heads, I did. The vampire growled in Dean's face, and Dean smiled at him mockingly. What did you give to me? The vampire spat each word in Dean's face. Dean whitened his smile. Them pitnin, courtesy of my gooey friends. And I added a few other things courtesy of a witchy friend. I also added a tinge of dead man's blood. The vampire hurled. Leviathans, he hissed. The alpha told me about them. Well, we'll have to see if it kills me. So far I've only lost my speed, but Dean Winchester, you're dying right now. The vampire raised his other hand high behind him, ready to strike. His fingernails had extended so that they looked like sharp-pointed claws. Dean struggled, but the vampire's grip did not falter. You. Stop. Sam shouted and he took hold of the vamp's arm. The vampire looked at him with fascination. Dean saw the change in the vampire's face. His expression of feral rage was replaced by a softened smile. Dean gritted his teeth. He kicked at the vampire's legs, but the vampire didn't even flinch. He just pushed Dean more forcefully into the cupboards. Dean cried out as the handle in his back pushed against his vertebral column. Sam released the vampire's arm and stepped back. His face was calm and blank. Dean could tell that he was trying to hide his fear. Keep up a brave front, but Dean could see the terror in his hazel eyes. Why, Samuel? I know how much you love this pathetic excuse for a brother, but why? All that he ever did was hurt you, the vampire said softly. Dean looked at Sam, and his chest swelled with pride when he saw anger replace the fear in Sam's eyes. You don't know anything about him, so you keep your mouth shut, Sam said fiercely, and Dean chuckled. You hear that, you son of a bitch? Sammy just told you in clean words to screw yourself. He laughed. However, that laugh became a cry of pain when the vampire backhanded him. He felt his lips split, and he flexed his jaw to see if it was still in place. Sam eyed him, and Dean could tell by his expression what Sam was saying. Dean, for once in your life, can you keep your trap shut? Your smart talk's gonna be the death of you. Dean looked at him in a don't worry Sammy, I got this way. Even though he had no idea how he was gonna get out of this mess. Sam rolled his eyes. He looked back at the vampire, who was oblivious to their silent conversation. Let him go. He had no part in our deal, Sam said flatly, and the vampire shook his head. No part? He is the very reason that you made this deal. Samuel, I understand that he raised you. He fed you and made you laugh, but he hurt you when you needed him the most. Sam had that scared look back. You don't know what you're talking about. If you caught a glimpse of few of my memories, it don't mean that you know me. The vampire smiled and cocked his head. Not a few. Samuel, did I mention how adorable you are when you are drugged? Whenever I think that I have seen all there is to you, you prove me wrong. The vampire shook his head. You never cease to amaze me, Samuel. I sifted through quite a lot of your memories. However, I saw only one in depth. Sam had gone pale. He had that look of terror back in his eyes. You bastard. I'm gonna make you beg for mercy for what you did to him, Dean said, but the vampire ignored him. He was still looking at Sam with a soft smile. Do not worry. I cannot make you forget things, he said gently. Dean frowned at him. You've been eavesdropping, he said in an accusing tone. The vampire looked at him with a look of annoyance. I don't eavesdrop. I can hear everything. This is my domain. My territory. Did you really think that I just left you your phone? I was waiting to see if you have reinforcements. Turns out that you are quite alone, and the only you did have, Benny, will be dead soon. Sorry to break it to you, but the only one that's dying is your undead ass, Dean said with hate. He smirked at the vampire. This time the vampire broke his nose. Stop. Don't hurt him, Sam pleaded. Dean could feel warm blood oozing out of his nose. He clutched it and tried to stop the bleeding. He looked at Sam and again saw the same expression. This time it was with more anger. Dean would have grinned at him, but that would hurt his face even more. Samuel, does Dean know that you tried to kill yourself? The vampire said coldly. Dean immediately saw Sam go even paler and he looked down at his feet. No. Sam could never do that. He couldn't. This had to be a lie. Don't be ashamed, Samuel. It was Dean who drove you to the edge. He pushed you away when you were at your lowest. When you needed him the most. You begged him to take you back, yet he told you to pick a hemisphere. Sammy, tell me you didn't. Dean begged. He remembered the phone call when Sam had called him telling him that he was Lucifer's vessel. Sam had begged him to come back. Sam raised his head, and Dean could tell by looking at his face that it was the truth. No, Dean said quietly, not wanting to face the thought of his brother taking his own life. Dean, what you think? It was because of Lucifer. He had told me that I was his vessel, and I said that I would kill myself before saying yes. He did say that he would bring me back, but I had to know for sure, Sam said pleadingly. Dean could feel his heart hammering against his chest. Before or after? He asked angrily, with more anger than he wanted to. What? Sam asked confused. Before or after the phone call? Sam, Dean shouted, and Sam flinched. After, he said quietly while looking at his bare feet. He shot himself in the head. Then he gulped a bottle of pills, then he slit his wrists, then he drowned in a bathtub, then the vampire said as if he was reading a newspaper. Stop, Sam shouted. Please just stop. He was trembling. Dean couldn't believe his ears. Sam tried to do it more than once. Suddenly something broke inside him. He felt Gil claw in his chest. He had always thought that Sam was stubborn and strong, that no matter what Sam could never break. Never. Dean, it was a long time ago. It don't matter, Sam said. Dean looked at him incredulously. Don't matter. It matters, Sam. What if you had died for good? All my sacrifices would have been for nothing. It would have been cold oak all over again. Dean, I didn't, Sam said desperately. I thought that I could stop the apocalypse. Dean couldn't look at him anymore. You will pay for this, he hissed at the vampire who looked too smug and proud of himself, practically preening over the fact that he was hurting Sam through Dean. That was not the only time you hurt him, Dean. The elder vampire said. He lightly brushed his fingers in Dean's hair before pulling them taut. Dean scowled at him. Please, just stop, Sam said in a broken voice. I am doing you a favor, Samuel. I am getting rid of him for you, the vampire said as he released Dean's hair. Dean looked at Sam, who quickly bowed his head down. Dean sighed. He couldn't give the vampire the satisfaction that his words were actually getting to Dean. Sam and him would figure out this mess later without a therapist, and right now Dean needed to get a door handle out of his back. Sammy, it's okay. We'll clear the water under the bridge later. Right now we just need to get rid of a dirty fish, Dean said as he glared at the vampire. The vampire did not hate him, but instead looked at him deviously. Dean braced himself for another one of Sam's deep dark secrets. If you love him so much, then why did you promise to hunt him down and kill him? Dean looked at Sam with his "this guy crazy" expression, but Sam looked just about ready to dig a ditch and hide in it. Dean frowned at him. He had never promised such stupid things. Never. Dean scoffed. I never said anything like that. The vampire looked at him with an expression of utter disgust and revulsion. And you lied too, he arled. He turned his gaze towards Sam. Tell him, Samuel. That voice message is engraved in your mind and you still believe it. You still listen to it. Stop. Why are you doing this? Sam said miserably. He was on the verge of tears. I never sent Sam any stupid voice message. Sam, tell him that his brains are screwed because of messing with your geeky brain. But Sam remained quiet and looked at Dean with immense sadness. The vampire sighed. Samuel. I know that you have learned it by heart. If you do not tell him the message, I will surely end his miserable existence. Sam looked at the vampire wide-eyed. It don't matter. It was a long time ago. Whatever you're trying to do, to create this rift between me and my brother. It won't work, Sam said firmly. The vampire raised his clawed hand again. Sam raised his hands. Okay. Just don't hurt him. He sighed and took a deep breath. When I was at the Covenant with Ruby, you sent a voice message and... Dean chuckled in realization. Yeah, I did, and so what? What's so wrong about it? It was a bit girly, so what? I meant every word and I still do. Sam suddenly jerked. He looked shocked, and disbelief was etched on his face. You do, even after I jumped. Even after I got you out. You still think that I'm a monster. A monster? Dean shook his head. What the hell, Sam? All I said was that I owed you a serious beatdown, and that no matter what happens, we're brothers. Sam was wide-eyed. He went and sat down on the couch near the cupboards. His hands were shaking and he was trembling all over. He buried his face in his palms. Sam, what? Dean asked, dumbfounded. Sam rose from the couch. His expression of helplessness was gone. He seemed fierce and resolute. Let us go. Our deal is done. I don't want to play any more of your games. Release my brother. Sam said calmly, but the words were spoken with burning anger. Dean smiled at Sam, who smiled back. Suddenly the vampire kneed him in the stomach. Dean, who had not been expecting the offense, yelled in pain and doubled over. Yup, the vamp still had its freaking strength. The vampire then gripped his throat again, holding him the same way that he had been before. But by Dean Winchester. No. Please. Let my brother go. I'll do anything, Sam yelled as he tried to pull the elder vampire's arm using both of his hands. Dean wanted to yell at him to go away from the vampire. To run, to dash for the door, because right then and there he saw the vampire's eyes gleam in a strange way. It was a predatory gleam of lust and hunger. But Dean couldn't talk because he was gasping and holding on for dear life. The vampire released him after giving an extra squeeze. Dean dropped on all fours, panting and gasping. Sam had backed away again. The vampire was glaring at Sam. The vampire clutched Dean's collar from behind and pulled him upright beside him. He then laid his hand on Dean's shoulder. Dean was rubbing his sore throat and trying to clear his vision from the black specks that were refusing to go away, no matter how much he blinked. Anything? The vampire asked. Dean looked at Sam while shaking his head, but Dean could read Sam's "I have to do this" Dean expression. Sammy, don't you dare, Dean said sternly. Sam nodded at the elder vampire. Sam tried to remain calm and unfazed as he stared into those gleaming eyes that he loathed so much. He was not scared of the elder vampire now, not like he had been before. He was scared because Dean was standing right there in front of him. Dean was alive, bruised and scarred, but alive. He looked too thin, but Sam was sure that problem could be solved by greasy onions and an endless supply of pie. He had felt new strength and determination rise in his aching body when he had hugged Dean. All his hard work, his sleepless nights and his misery had finally paid off. He had never felt this much happiness before. Maybe he had, when Dean had returned from hell, but this was different because this time he had bought Dean back, and he was determined not to lose him again because of the stupid vampire. Sam was sure what Dean had done to the elder vampire, but his speed was gone. Sam remembered how strange it had been to see the vampire running towards him. Anything? The vampire asked in a longing manner. Sam nodded at the elder vampire. He was sure that the vampire wouldn't hurt him if it had saved him from Maya. However, the prospect of the vampire entering his mind scared the crap out of him. Sammy, don't even think about it, Dean said sternly, but the naked concern in his voice was masked by his gruff tone. Sam hoped that Dean's nose was broken badly. Thankfully it was not bleeding anymore. It's okay, Dean, Sam said reassuringly. He tried not to show his pain on his face, because his chest was aching badly along with his broken wrist. He knew he had broken ribs, but at least his head wasn't throbbing anymore. That relentless pounding that had been there every time he had woken up the past few days had been replaced by a dull ache. He knew that his weakness and prolonged sleep was connected to the elder vampire's mind meld. It's not. Dean napped at him. He tried to shrug off the elder vampire's hand from his shoulder, but Sam knew that the vampire's grip was like a vice. Alright, Samuel, I'll let your brother live, the elder vampire said, and Sam frowned at him, hearing the unspoken "but." And you'll let him go? You want me, not him, Sam said fiercely, even though the thought of being alone in this room again terrified him. Dean began, but the vampire cut him off. No, Samuel, I will not. I do not let little pests scurry about their merry way, and besides, I am sure your foolish brother will try to force his way in again. You're the foolish one, seeing how you couldn't hear us storm through your friggin' mansion. Didn't you say that you can hear everything? Dean said as he finally jerked away from the vampire, or the more likely thing to have happened being that the vampire had released him. Dean quickly came to stand beside Sam. The vampire smiled. Not at that time. That time the only thing I could hear was the sweet flow of Samuel's blood in his veins, Kea said as he smacked his lips. Dean growled. Why don't you taste me? I'm sure I'll meet your standards. Sam clutched his bicep. Dean. Shut up, Sam. Dean cut off his brother's whine as he continued to have a staring contest with the vampire. The vampire flashed his white row of teeth and cocked his head. You two are brothers after all, but I can smell your blood, and it smells nothing like Samuel's, no tint of power in it. Sam knew what the vampire was talking about. He was reminded of the fact every day that he was tainted, and like always he remembered tonight, the memory that Azazel had showed him. How the demon had poured blood on his baby lips while he laid in the crib and Mary burned above him. He wished that he could forget that memory. He shuddered and Dean squeezed his shoulder reassuringly, probably sensing his distress. Why don't you try? I'm sure I taste great, Dean said. What the hell was wrong with him? Sam thought. Dean was practically begging the vampire to bite him. The vampire sighed impatiently. The only course of action I find tempting is killing you, Dean Winchester. Right back at you, Dean said through clenched teeth. 'Cause that would be the only way you could touch my brother, and I'm pretty sure I'll haunt your ass even after you kill me. The vampire's lip curled upward in an animalistic growl. My patience is wearing thin. Maybe I should kill you. No? Sam said alarmed. He knew that the vampire was too friggin' strong, and Dean didn't stand a chance against it. Dean already looked pale and his face was bruised. He was supporting a split, swollen lip and a broken nose, and by the way that Dean was holding his middle, Sam was sure that the vampire had done some damage there too. He didn't want to add a ruptured spleen to the mix. "Come here, Samuel," the elder vampire said softly as he extended his long hand towards him. Sam gulped. He did say that he'd do anything, but now he was thinking otherwise. "Like hell he will," Dean said as he puffed out his chest and came to stand in front of Sam, instead of staying beside him. Dean glared at the vampire, a promise of pain being projected through sharp green eyes. A small smile crept on Sam's face as he automatically tried to hide his huge body behind Dean. It was an instinct, a habit. His shoulders would automatically sag, and a smile would creep on his face. The best thing was that Dean would never see him smiling. Sam's heart melted at this familiar gesture. He had missed Dean so much. Happiness enveloped him. Sam was sure it was his smile that made the vampire angry because suddenly the vampire ran up to them. Dean again pushed Sam behind him with one hand. Sam staggered back and watched as Dean gracefully dropped to the floor and pushed Case's legs from under him. Surprisingly enough, Case lost his balance and fell down, giving a surprised gasp. Dean immediately grabbed Sam's hand and bolted through the open door, pulling Sam with him. However, Sam couldn't follow him out when he felt his shirt being yanked from behind. Sam yelped as he was pulled back. Before he could try to fight, he felt the elder vampire's chest behind him. His arms were crossed in front of him and held forcefully from his wrists against his chest by the vampire's cold vice-like grip. Sam bit his lip to keep himself from crying out because the vampire was squeezing his plastered wrist. Dean was standing a few feet away, trembling with rage and anger. "Let him go," he shouted. Sam cried out when the vampire squeezed his wrist, damaging the plaster. "Sam," Dean shouted, but he kept his distance. "I'm okay, Dean," Sam said in a firm voice. "I'm okay." "Didn't you say that you'll do anything for your brother's life, Samuel?" Case whispered in his ear. Sam flinched and slowly nodded. He hated that the elder vampire was almost as tall as him. He hated how that voice could send shivers down his spine. "Only if you let him go," Sam said, relieved that the vampire was now holding his arm instead of his wrist. "You're not in a position to make demands," Case said. Suddenly he released Sam, only to push him back behind him forcefully, just like Dean had done earlier. Sam felt his ribs press against his lungs, and he broke into a fit of violent coughs. He heard Dean yell out his name. When he finally regained his bearing, he frowned to see Dean once again fighting with the vampire. This time, however, he was losing. Sam rubbed his chest and looked around for something, anything with which he could hit the vampire with. He saw the heavy lamp, its shades stained with Maya's blood. He ran towards it and lifted it again when he heard Dean yelled. Sam spun around and saw that the vampire had pushed Dean's hand inside the rectangular handle of the cupboard. Before Dean could pull his hand out, the vampire pushed at the edges with his fingers so that the steel handle deformed like Play-Doh. The thin metallic edges closed in and formed a perfect circular ring around Dean's right wrist so that it looked like a metallic cuff, but it seemed tighter like a bracelet. Dean yelled in frustration, and Sam hoped it wasn't tight enough to affect blood flow. "Not the friggin' handle again. I just got it out of my back. Fuck," Dean shouted as he tried to pull his hand, but he was trapped. The elder vampire stood back as if he was admiring his handiwork. Sam was still holding the lamp. Case turned around to look at him. "Samuel, put it down before you hurt yourself." "I didn't hurt Dean. I would have cuffed him, but I don't have my speed anymore, and this mansion is very huge, so I improvise." "Damn it, I can't feel my friggin' hand," Dean said, exasperated. He had stopped struggling and was flexing his fingers. He looked at Sam and Sam gave him a smile, telling him, "I'm okay, Dean, we'll figure this out." Dean gave a tiny nod and gave a low growl when the elder vampire strode towards Sam. Sam tensed up, but the elder vampire walked past him and sat down at the edge of the unmade bed, before patting at the spot beside him. Sam recounted his past encounter when the vamp had done the exact same thing. Sam didn't need a recap. Nope. Sam shook his head, and the elder vampire frowned in disapproval. "You said that you would do anything for your brother." Sam sighed, and instead of going towards the bed, Sam sat down on the huge couch on the side of the cupboards a few feet away from the door. The vampire followed a few minutes later, smiling in a sinister way. He sat down beside him. All this while Dean kept shouting and cursing. Sam tensed as the elder vampire sidled close to him. Sam kept his gaze on the floor. "Leave him alone, you Sinuvovich. I swear to God I'm gonna make you beg for mercy. I'm not gonna just slice your head off, I'm gonna make you suffer. You touch one hair on his head and you'll have hell to pay." Sam felt reassured at hearing Dean's relentless curses and threats. That's what Dean did whenever he was worried or Sam was in trouble. Sam again felt a small smile play on his lips, which disappeared when the elder vampire stood up and made his way towards Dean. "You've already signed your death contract," but the rest of the sentence was muffled when the vampire placed his palm on Dean's mouth. "You will remain quiet if you do not want me to rip out your tongue." Dean punched the vampire's face awkwardly with his left hand, but the vampire didn't even flinch. "No, you won't hurt him," Sam said firmly. The elder vampire removed his palm, and Dean continued to throw a long line of curses at him. The vampire backhanded him and Dean's face apt to the side. "Dean," Sam said as he stood up again. Dean took a moment to focus on him. He blinked several times before glaring at Sam. He was going to back down from protecting his brother. "Dean, just don't talk," Sam said quietly. He pleaded with Dean, eyes imploring. Dean huffed out a miserable sigh after nodding. Sam knew that Dean would start again, but he was relieved when Dean pressed his lips together and glared fiercely at Case. "Now, where were we, Samuel?" the elder vampire said as he once again sat down on the couch. Sam sighed and followed him. Dean was now looking with fear and helplessness. Sam tried his best to put up a brave face, and he smiled at Dean reassuringly. "I'll not hurt Dean again," Case said as he held out his hand. Sam took a deep breath and placed his hand in the vampire's outstretched one. He trembled when he felt the familiar tingling sensation of a sudden bone-deep chill and goosebumps that had nothing to do with the cold. Sam felt his eyes widen involuntarily. Case was rubbing his thumb in a circular motion on Sam's pulse point on his wrist, and Sam felt his nerves ignite under his touch. His senses became heightened and Sam panted heavily. Somehow this time something felt different. It felt stronger, the connection. Just a simple touch was driving him on edge. "Samuel, I want you to give yourself up to me. If you fight back, it'll hurt you because this time I won't hold back," the elder vampire said gently. He continued to rub the inside of his wrist. Sam looked anywhere but at Dean. He didn't want Dean to see how scared he was. Even Lucifer couldn't do this to him. Sam knew that he'd fight. There was no way in hell he was gonna let the elder vampire just waltz right in through his mind. "You let me have my way with you just like you would let Jess on Sunday mornings." Sam froze. Those memories were private. He already couldn't think about Jess without remembering Lucifer, and now he had another psycho to tarnish her memories. He shuddered as terror clawed at his throat. "No. Sam said. His voice sounded pathetic even to his own ears. He heard pounding and raised his head to see Dean trying to free himself. He was pushing against the cupboard with his foot and pulling with his whole body weight. Sam could see the red agitated skin around his wrist, marks that would bruise. "Dean, stop it," Sam yelled. At this rate Dean would only end up breaking his wrist. It was already bleeding, and Sam knew that Dean wouldn't stop trying to break free, even if his wrist snapped. Dean stopped pulling and looked at Sam with fear. "Seriously, Sam, like I said. This." Dean pulled again and winced, "is one of the most stupidest things you've ever done." He lowered his foot and pulled so that the cupboard opened and Dean stomped in frustration. Suddenly Sam gasped as Case raised his wrist to his mouth. Sam waited for the raid on his mind to begin, but the vampire just licked and didn't bite. Sam wanted to throw up in disgust as he felt the wet tongue lapping on his wrist. "Samuel, if you try to fight back you'll end up bleeding just like the other humans. So far I have been gentle with you because the human mind is a fragile thing, but your mind it like the others." Sam remained quiet as he continued to stare at the floor. "Hey creep, quit touching him," Dean shouted, and thankfully Case did not get up to strike him again. "I'm telling you, if you mess with his mind you're the one who's gonna end up getting fried." "Samuel," Case whispered. Sam turned his gaze towards the vampire. "Don't resist me. As long as you don't resist you won't get hurt," he said as his gleaming eyes burned holes into Sam's mind. Sam gulped as he saw the white gleaming fangs protruded from the elder vampire's gums. "I won't take much. Blood bond makes our connection stronger," Case explained, as his fangs pierced Sam's skin. It didn't hurt as much as Maya's bites did, it just tickled a little, and Sam prepared himself for the mental onslaught. "Sammy," Dean shouted. Sam looked at him and gave him a tight smile. Dean's whole hand had turned a shade of blue, his brother's frantic struggle cutting off the circulation to his wrist. Sam was just about to tell him to stop trying to break his wrist when Sam felt Case clawing at his mind again. Sam clenched his teeth as he automatically began to put up barriers. He felt the elder vampire's disapproval and anger. He drew back from his mind and from his wrist, but didn't break the connection. Sam was left panting with the effort. He groaned as his head began to split in pain. "Samuel, I will kill Dean if you continue this. I don't want to hurt you," Case said, exasperated. "Sammy, what's going on?" Dean asked worriedly. "What the hell are you doing to him, you bastard? I am getting sick of your pathetic whining. Maybe I should knock you out," Case said as he resumed his small circles on Sam's wrist, smearing the blood which was now oozing from the wounds. "No," Sam said, "I'll only stop fighting if you let him go." Suddenly Sam sensed the vampire's anger and rage rolling off from him. "I gave you a choice, Samuel. A choice to save your brother from this." Sam looked at the vampire in confusion. "From what?" he asked. The elder vampire smiled and he suddenly clutched Sam by the shoulders. Sam tried to break free, but Case effortlessly turned him around, twisting his body and making him lie down on the couch, with forcing his head on the armrest. Before Sam could try to scramble out, Case had lifted Sam's legs on the couch and was sitting on the edge leaning over him. his hand on Sam's chest to prevent him from getting up. Sam looked at the vampire in fear. From this chaos set as he leaned in and bit forcefully on Sam's neck, the side which was not covered by gauze. Sam screamed and once again he felt the vampire clawing in, but this time it was similar to the time when the vampire had showed him Dean in purgatory. The vampire didn't invade further. Somewhere Sam could hear Dean's screaming voice, but Sam couldn't make out the words. All his attention was turned to the images that were beginning to play in his mind. He could no longer hear Dean. He saw the image of a room flash in front of his eyes. He could recognize that room anywhere. Dread crawled up his throat and he began to struggle. He knew what would happen next. He didn't want to see it. No, he didn't want to relive that night again. He couldn't. He didn't want to see that again. He'd rather be tortured by Lucifer. The images of the memory were disfigured for a second, but then they appeared again with more force, and Sam's head began to split with pain. He stopped resisting in his haze of pain, and now he was inside the memory. Dean was pinned to the table and Sam was pinned to the wall. Sam screamed, pleaded and begged, but he couldn't hear the words leave his mouth. Dean's face was twisted with horror and dread. It was the night when the hellhounds had mauled Dean to death. The night when Dean had died for the first time. Dean was pulled away from the table by an invisible force, and Sam knew that it was a hellhound, but suddenly Chaos appeared in place of the hellhound. Chaos was dragging Dean while Dean clutched to the table. Chaos pulled Dean away and pinned him on the floor, sitting on top of him and straddling his thighs. Chaos raised his clawed hand and in a blinding fast move, he brought his hand down, clawing Dean's chest. Dean screamed and blood started staining his shirt. Sam was crying and screaming, but it felt as if his own voice was gone. All he could do was watch and sob. Chaos clawed at Dean's chest again and again, tearing him up like a piece of meat. Sam watched as Dean screamed and arched his back. His shirt was now in shreds, and his torn bloody flesh was visible. Sam couldn't take it anymore. Enough. Sam screamed and at once he was back. Back on the couch. He was sobbing and tears were flowing freely down his face. Chaos was leaning over him, cupping his face. He wiped the tears on Sam's face with his thumb. "Sammy, talk to me." "Sam." Dean screamed. His voice seemed raw and hoarse, as if he had been screaming for hours. "Samuel, will you give yourself up?" Chaos asked. "You know now what will happen." Sam nodded. He couldn't lose Dean again. He had just got Dean back. Sam ifed. "Sam, please. Samuel, look at me." Dean shouted, but Sam didn't look at him. He had already given up. He could feel chaos easily entering his mind, sifting through his memories. "Good boy," Chaos said fondly. He leaned in and caught Sam's lips in a passionate kiss. Sam couldn't pull back. He felt as if Chaos had taken control of his body. His lips parted on their own accord, giving the elder vampire entry. Dean's voice was lost in the background once again, and Sam felt the vampire's lust envelope him. Sam's arms were still by his sides. He couldn't move them. "It's okay, Samuel. You're mine now," Chaos said in his mind. "We're one." Memories began to flash in front of his eyes once again, but this time Sam and Chaos were seeing it together. Their minds were completely merged. Sam could feel happiness, lust and contentment. He was 4 and he had dropped his ice cream. Dean gave his ice cream to Sam instead. He was 7 and was crying when Dad came home limping and covered in blood. Dean laid him in bed before stitching Dad up. He was 15 and had killed his first werewolf. Dean took him at a bar to celebrate. He was walking on an empty road with his bag on his shoulder, leaving for Stanford. Jess was burning on the ceiling. Dean pulled him out of the fire. He was kneeling on the ground in cold oak, and Dean was holding him. He was trying to drink himself to death when every demon had refused to make a deal with him after Dean's death. Ruby was lying sprawled on a bed while he cut her arm and sucked her blood. He was killing Lilith, and suddenly there was a blast of blinding white light. Tim and Reggie were forcing demon blood down his throat. He spit it back into their faces. He said yes to Lucifer. He was in the field and was looking at Dean's bloody, bruised face. He took out the horseman rings from his pocket and opened the cage. He nodded at Dean and fell, dragging Michelle down with him. He was enveloped in flames, flames that were cold, too cold, cold like burning ice. The flames slithered on his skin like coiled aches. The smell of burnt flesh enveloped him. Sam immediately felt the elder vampire's apprehension as the vampire tried to skip over that memory, but Sam was going to let him. Sam knew what he had to do. He began to fight again. Case should have known that Sam was no ordinary human. He was a psychic and a stubborn one. He was the master of resisting painful headaches. Before Chaos could pull back, Sam began to rebuild his barriers, trapping Chaos in his memory, trapping Chaos in the cage, Lucifer's cage. He felt the vampire's fury and anger replace the happiness and lust. He was hanging with hooks while Lucifer peeled off his skin and carved at his chest, revealing his ribs. He couldn't scream anymore. His voice was gone, used up from all the screaming. Sam felt the vampire trying to break free. "Samuel, let me go. End the memory." The vampire screamed in his mind. Sam chuckled. "It ends when you can't take it anymore." Lucifer's fingers were under the skin of his arms, groping at his muscles underneath. The vampire screamed and pleaded in his mind. Sam screamed with him. He was pinned to the wall. Wooden stakes were impaled in his hands and his ankles. Lucifer was showing him his intestines. The elder vampire was begging him to stop, he was begging for it to end. He couldn't take it anymore. Sam could feel Case's mind breaking, getting weaker, but he wouldn't stop. He would only stop when every ounce of sanity was driven from the vampire's mind. He was bound on a table, and Lucifer was breaking every bone in his body slowly, so slow that it was agonizing. Lucifer was breaking his fingers one by one. After each app, Lucifer would whisper words of comfort in his ear because he was wearing Dean. The vampire was screaming in his mind. He had stopped begging, and Sam could feel the other psychic's resolve breaking. He would only stop when the vampire's resolve would be completely shattered. He could feel Lucifer carving up his arms, but there was no pain this time. The pain in his arms was forgotten, while he focused on the spiders crawling in his brains. He could feel Lucifer's hand entering his chest, breaking his ribs like mere twigs. Lucifer was wearing Dean again. Sam looked down at the arm elbow deep inside his chest with mild physician. The pain was now part of him. The pain was like a fifth limb. He did not scream when Lucifer scratched his lungs and groped his heart. He did not scream. The elder vampire's mind was now shattered, broken. Sam released the elder vampire and entered the darkness that was waiting to proclaim him. An NSNN. Dean cursed at the handle around his wrist as he pulled with all his might, but the friggin' handle did not budge. He looked at Sam and saw how scared he was. The elder vampire was sucking blood from his wrist, and Sam was frozen in place. Sam had his eyes closed, and Dean knew that the vamp was trying to screw with his mind again. Dean bit his lip, ignoring the pain surging through his wrist. His hand was completely numb, and his wrist was badly bruised. Instead of pulling, he opened the cupboard and began to work on the nails that had bolted the handle in place, but the only thing that he accomplished during that was to tear and bloody the fingers of his left hand. Dean was pulled out of his ordeal when he heard Sam gasp. He turned around and his eyes went wide with horror when he saw Sam lying on the couch with the vampire on top of him. Suddenly the vampire plunged into Sam's neck, burying its fangs, and Sam screamed. "Sammy!" Dean shouted. He hated this, he hated being helpless and made to watch as his little brother suffered. Sam's arms were limp on his sides, and his eyes were impossibly wide. "Get off him, you freak! You son of bitch!" Dean screamed. He screamed till his throat went raw. His heart twisted with horror and dread when he saw tears flow down Sam's face, trailing down his cheeks. "Enough!" Sam shouted, and he let out a strangled sob. Sam was whimpering, and, finally, the vampire pulled back. The elder vampire's lips were scarlet with Sam's blood. Dean felt bile rise to his throat at the sight. "Sammy, Sam. Talk to me, buddy." Dean asked desperately, trying to meet his brother's eye, but Sam kept staring at the vampire, who was looking intently into his face. "Samuel, will you give yourself up?" Case asked. "You know now what will happen." Dean had no idea what had freaked Sam out so much, because he knew his brother had a high threshold for pain. A bite could never make him cry. "Sammy, don't listen to him," Dean ordered, but Sam still did not meet his gaze. Instead, Sam nodded at the elder vampire. The vampire smiled and cupped Sam's face, and suddenly he was kissing Sam. Kissing him, Dean felt his face blanch, fear running through him that his brother was going to be raped by this vampire. Dean couldn't take it anymore. He fished for his phone in his pocket and called Benny. Come on, pick up." But Benny did not pick up, instead he was met with the voicemail. Dean gritted his teeth. "Benny, get your ass back to Count's mansion ASAP, I need your help, man. Please, hurry up." Dean sighed and clicked off the phone. "Please, leave him alone. Take me instead." Dean begged, but it seemed as if neither the vampire nor Sam could hear him. Sam Wati even struggling while the vampire continuously kissed him and nibbled at his lips. "That's it." Dean clenched his jaw. Placing one foot against the cupboard so that the door wouldn't open, he began to pull with his body weight. He ignored the sharp streaks of pain radiating from his swollen, bruised wrist. He had to get to Sammy. This Wati how it was supposed to happen. Sammy shouldn't be the one protecting him and making deals for him. It should be the other way around. Dean bit his lip to prevent himself from crying out. A low growl made him spin around. The vampire was finally pulling away from Sam. Dean's gut twisted at the sight of his broken brother. Sam was too pale and too still. Suddenly both his arms shot up and Sam pulled the vampire back, holding him in place. Dean frowned. What the hell was going on? The elder vampire was frozen in Sam's hold. He pulled away again, breaking the lip lock. "No, please. No more." The elder vampire sobbed. His usual smug, alluring expression had been replaced by infinite terror. He was actually shivering. Sam's face, on the other hand, was stoic and firm. Sam gripped the vampire's shoulders, holding him in place. Dean had no idea what was going on. With that freaky super strength, the vampire should have easily broken out of Sam's hold. "Stop." The vampire screamed in agony, and finally Sam released him. The vampire scrambled to the floor on all fours and blinked. He sat on his knees and ran a hand over his face. Then on both of his arms, eyes wide and glazed as if he watched all there. He looked at his shaking hands. I told you not to mess with his geeky brain. Dean said as pride swelled in his chest. Sam had fought against Lucifer and won. What was a lowly vampire compared to the devil himself? He glanced at Sam in worry. Sam was unconscious. The bite wound on his neck was still bleeding and soaking the couch underneath. The elder vampire, on the other hand, had completely lost it. He kept running his hands all over his body and his hair. He lifted up his shirt and ran a hand over his stomach. Hey! Dean shouted at the cowering vampire. The vampire raised his face and blinked at Dean. Suddenly he screamed and began to shuffle backwards. No, please. No more. Please, Lucifer. The vampire shouted while eyeing Dean with fear. Dean frowned. Lucifer. Of course. The idiotic vamp had been mind-raping his brother. Of course he would have gone through the memories from the cage. Wait. Was the vampire calling him Lucifer? No, he couldn't imagine that Lucifer tortured Sam wearing his skin. I won't torture you if you free my wrist, Dean said sternly. The vampire blinked at him foolishly and shook his head. His usual slick, arranged hair was now disheveled. Please, stop. The vampire then began to sob into his hands. Dean rolled his eyes. Sam still walked awake. If the vampire had experienced those memories, then Sam must have seen them too. Dean's worry increased up several notches as he remembered the seizures that Sam used to get just from a glimpse of his time in cage. Suddenly the door flew open and Benny barged in. He was covered in blood again with a machete in his hand. He froze in his tracks when he saw the vampire sobbing on the floor. What the bloody hell? He said while shaking his head in disbelief. Benny? Dean called, apping Benny out of his stupor. Walking over, Benny began to examine the handle. He opened the cupboard and began to work on the screws holding the handle in place, using a small knife to get them out. In a minute, Dean was free and rubbing his sore, bloody wrist. He took off the ring of metal still attached to his hand and threw it across the room. Benny raised an eyebrow at him. "Want to tell me how that happened, Chief?" Benny asked as he pointed to his former sire. Dean ignored him. Cupboard handle down. Freaky vamp to go. Dean held out his hand to Benny. Benny immediately placed his machete in Dean's hand, getting the message. Dean stood in front of the kneeling vampire and positioned the machete at the vamp's throat. "This is for my brother, you son of a bitch. You start thinking Sammy's fair game, you've got another thing coming." Dean spat out as his lip turned upward, and he swung the machete. There was a sickening swishing sound, and the vampire's head landed on the carpet, followed by its lifeless body. "If it can bleed, it can die," Dean said as he handed the machete back to Benny and ran towards his unconscious little brother. Dean checked Sam's pulse. It was weak and erratic. "We have to go, Chief," Benny said. "This place is gonna go haywire now that the boss is dead." Dean nodded. He began to lift Sam up, but Benny stepped forwards. "I'll carry him, Dean. I'm stronger. You clear the path." Dean hesitated. He didn't like to see Sammy being carried in arms other than his own when Sam was so vulnerable. Dean, Benny said warningly, "They're getting closer." "Alright. Just, he's my little brother, Benny," Dean said helplessly. Benny nodded with a smile on his face. "You can trust me, Chief." He placed one arm under Sam's knees and other under Sam's neck, carrying him bridal style. "Kid's actually lighter than I expected," Benny said as he began to follow Dean out of the door. "Yeah, that's cause the bastard's been drinking him," Dean said through clenched teeth. The hallway was empty. He motioned Benny to come out. They began to quickly move through the hallways with Benny pointing the way. Suddenly, they turned a corner and immediately ran into 4 vampires. Dean easily decapitated 3 of them with Benny's machete, while shielding Benny from them. These vampires were nothing as compared to the monsters he had faced in purgatory. However, the 4th one pinned him to the wall and the 5th one bit into his neck. Dean hissed in pain. The 4th vampire was pulled off from him by Benny, and the 5th one parted from his neck with a pop. The vampire collapsed to the ground on his knees while holding his own throat and choking on blood. Dean smiled at the vampire. "Why do you think I was begging your boss to drink me?" The vampire's reply was a gurgling noise as blood flowed down his chin. Benny had decapitated the 4th vampire and was picking Sam up, who had been propped against the wall. "What did you do?" Benny asked while looking at the suffering vampire. Dean shrugged. "Injected myself with the same stuff as the darts." Benny grinned at him as he readjusted Sam in his arms. They made it out of the mansion with 2 more encounters with the vamps. Dean got bitten 1 more time, but that didn't slow him down. Finally they made it to the hidden door. "Damn it," Dean said as he stopped at the door. There were dark, heavy clouds in the sky and it was pouring outside. Dean took off his jacket and covered up Sam as much as he could. "Thank the Lord for small miracles. I wouldn't have been able to come if the sky was clear," Benny said as he stepped into the pouring rain and began to head towards the gate. As they walked down the path, Dean caught sight of something behind the bushes on the left side of the path. He hadn't seen it last time because he had come at night. He immediately ran towards it. "Baby," Dean said gratefully as he traced the hood of the sleek black classic car. He crossed his fingers and tried to open the door. It opened. He peeked inside and saw the keys in the ignition. "Open the back," Benny grunted. He was panting under Sam's weight. Dean opened it, and Benny laid Sam on the back seat. Dean arranged his tall, lanky brother so he could get as comfortable as possible. "You home, Sammy?" Dean said as he brushed Sam's wet bangs from his face. He got in the front. The passenger seat was filled with books and notes. The floor was littered with coffee cups. He owed Sam a serious beatdown for mistreating Baby. He cleared the passenger seat and Benny climbed in. "So, where are we heading?" Benny asked. "A cabin I know of," Dean replied as he turned the key and his baby roared to life. The low growl of the engine was like music to his ears. He finally had his brother back. Now all he had to do was nurse his little brother back to health. The end. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.